If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
Have you ever had a creepy, frightening paranormal encounter or unknown sighting in the woods or backwoods that left you feeling genuinely unsettled?
Still have no idea what it was. The event happened in Tennessee. I was in 9th grade, and it was during winter. I loved how cool it looked when the woods were covered in snow, but one day when I went back in the woods, I was following this old four-wheeler path, and then I saw this huge two-legged thing. Its legs were inverted, its body was very unproportional, with a really wide upper body and relatively normal but backward legs. My heart dropped, and I ran out of there and went back a couple of hours later with my brother, and the tracks it left were just lines, like it was dragging its feet the whole way. This happened all the way back in 2017. I was camping with my friend. He had a huge farm surrounded by forest. We were outside in front of the farmhouse in a tent. He was asleep, but I always have insomnia, so I was wide awake. All of a sudden, I hear loud, slow footsteps coming from out of the forest, coming over in the direction of the tent. This terrified me because I didn't know what it was. A bear? A deer? A person? No clue. So I was waiting for the footsteps to stop outside the tent, and I was preparing myself for the absolute worst because since it was heading in the tent's direction, that's what I assumed was going to happen. But it didn't. Instead, these footsteps moved past the tent. So, after hearing these loud, slow, methodical footsteps come from out of the woods, ignoring two defenseless kids, and then silence for easily 10 minutes, curiosity started to eat away at me. When I was a kid, I was stupid. I unzipped the tent and quietly peeked my head out to see if I can see anything. I'm looking all around the tree line, the house, everywhere, and I cannot find the source of these footsteps. I am just about to retract my head inside when I notice something that seems rather perplexing. Behind the farmhouse to the right is the actual farm, and next to it is a pole. I saw what looked like a 30 feet tall grayish silver pole standing next to this farm. It was shining and glistening in the moonlight. I studied this weird structure up and down with my eyes, confused, because I damn well I would have easily noticed this 30-foot tall ducking pole bizarrely placed inches away from this farm earlier when it was daytime, but I didn't. BTW, I should really start calling this thing a pole, because after looking at this strange object really hard, I realized that this ducking pole had arms and legs. They looked like rods, perfectly straight, symmetrical, and proportioned with their size and stature. I couldn't figure out how to explain it, but it appeared smooth and round, seemingly stretched out. I then realized that it was doing something. It was spinning in a circle. It moved at a remarkably slow pace. I was dumbfounded. I had no idea what I could possibly be looking at. All of a sudden, this 30-foot tall, shiny, spinning, pole-like humanoid thing took an uncomfortably long step back into the woods, spinning ever so slowly, still glistening and shining in the moonlight. I had no idea how to react. I couldn't think of anything to say, so I simply returned to the tent and lay on my back until the sun rose. I had no sleep at all, and after that day, I never hung out with my friend at that farm again. I don't know what it was. Trick of the eye? A humanoid? Could it be a mysterious black stick figure? Is it simply a glitch? Your guess is as good as mine. I saw something today. Have been hired by my neighbor to do landscaping. When I was out in the back of his yard dumping leaves, dirt, and sticks into a pile in the woods, I heard something rustling by the trees to my left. I turned towards the sound and see this 6 or 7 feet tall, bone-white thing running away from me back into the woods. It couldn't have been a bird because the pine trees it ran through were too big for any bird native to Nova Scotia to even move. Something is in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park woods near Cherokee.
My husband, who is 23 years old, and I, a 22-year-old female, have been celebrating our wedding anniversary for over a week now.
We have a camper in Cherokee, North Carolina, that we have been staying in. We have an interest in abandoned things like towns and cemeteries. We decided to visit Connor Cemetery, which is located near Couches Creek off Newfound Gap Road. Connor Cemetery lies approximately 1.9 miles away from the Oconaluftee Visitor Center. We parked near the trailhead and walked to the opening in the woods. The trail itself is visible, but you would have to be looking for it. We are walking in, heading towards where the cemetery is supposed to be. I am in the front looking down, checking for snakes and holes, and my husband is behind me. We have paused for a second, and he said, "Babe, look at that statue." I start looking around and ask, "Where?" He then points in the direction of the statue. I was expecting to see an angel statue, similar to those typically found in cemeteries. That is not what it was. I look upwards further up the trail, and off to the side is what looks to be a 12 to 15 feet tall deer/elk statue. The statue looks like it was either made up of wood or wrapped in leather hide and looked preserved. The problem is that nowhere online has it mentioned this statue or anything of the sort. It makes me uneasy because it had a strange face, and it was a weird place for something like that. My husband then said that he did not like it at all and that we should go. As soon as he said that, we turned around and left as fast as possible. Once we got back to our car, I told him that it did not feel right at all. He agreed with me and described seeing a deer-like face without a snout, mentioning that it appeared to blink and its right ear seemed to rotate fully, unlike a normal animal's ear. I told him what I saw was like an elk body with a camel mixed with an elk-like face. On the way back to our camper, I started thinking that I should have taken a picture of it, but unfortunately did not think to at the time. Once we returned to the camper, we began our research, but we were unable to locate any previous listings or sightings of this phenomenon. We decided to go back to a local Native American bookstore that we had gone to previously and speak to the older lady who runs it. We explained what had happened, and she advised us to speak to the visitor center in the national park to find out if anyone else had experienced something similar or if they knew of any native stories related to it. She had also said that sometimes things are chosen for you to be the only one to see them. We thanked the lady and returned to our camper. Now I'm typing this and wondering what we saw in the woods. If you have any info on what this could be, please let me know. We will be going to the visitor center tomorrow and most likely will be going back into the woods to see if it is still there or not. The woods. I live in a big neighborhood that is almost surrounded by woods. There is a trail where I'll go biking and a road that goes around back there. I and my friend Owen decided to walk into the woods one time and follow the path. As we turned around a bend, we started smelling a disgusting smell. It's like it was following us. We keep walking, and the smell stays with us. At one point we find fuzz on the ground and start to investigate. We discover a raccoon on the ground. Dead. Its lower jaw was missing, and its two legs were about 50 feet in front of them. Ants were ripping its carcass apart. We could tell something big did this, but we didn't know what it was. We decided to continue our walk. We finally reached the abandoned road and decided to sit and talk for a while. I started hearing crunches of branches coming from nearby trees around this road. He clearly didn't notice them. Almost on cue, we hear a large tree fall. We looked at each other and left it to just being really windy. As we started to walk back, he kept asking me if I saw anything near the road because he felt like we were being watched. I agreed with him and wanted to hurry back. All of a sudden we heard a tree snap and a loud screech. Not a human screech, something more ear-splitting. We then gunned it out of the woods. He quickly ran home, and so did I, but once I got inside, I decided to try and figure out what made that noise. What animal near Lake Superior, where I live, could make this noise? I tried to figure out what animal did this. No animal that I could find had this type of vocal range and description. I'm related to some Native American culture and did some research on that to try and figure it out. The Cree, a native tribe who lived west of Lake Superior, tell a tale of something called a wendigo, and it's described to make this noise. I called my friend and told him, but he didn't believe me. He said I was dumb and crazy. I truly believe we weren't being stalked by an animal that night but something much, much scarier. I went on a 3-month hiking and camping trip with my significant other, and we camped in remote locations because they are usually free, allowing us to save as much money as possible. One night, we posted up off of a random dirt road in the middle of the woods. There wasn't a town or anything for a couple of hours. We chose to set up the tent rather than sleep in the car because it was the middle of summer, and the temperature inside the car became uncomfortably hot. Anyways, around 3 a.m., my significant other got up to pee. He unzipped the tent and stepped outside a few feet away. I woke up from the noise he was making and checked my phone to see what time it was. Then, I heard a faint whisper. It sounded like a young woman trying to say something, but it was mumbled, noticeably audible, but you couldn't make out the words. The incredible part was that it wasn't just a small, short whisper. It sounded like someone was mumbling an entire sentence, kind of like what you would hear if someone was talking in their sleep. I thought maybe I was still half awake and imagining things until my significant other yelled, "What?" from outside the tent. He was talking to me. He believed I was attempting to communicate something to him. When he got back in the tent, I explained to him that it wasn't me. But I heard the exact same thing he did. We didn't sleep well that night and left at dawn. A few months ago, my friend and I decided to explore the woods by my house, which wasn't our first time there. However, this time it was already getting dark, so we had to use flashlights during most of our exploration to avoid stepping in burrows or getting caught in thorns. Eventually we went into this really deep ditch that spans through all of the woods, and we followed it for a while because there was a drainage pipe nearby, and we wanted to go in it. As we were getting close to it, we saw some porch lights come on. We looked and saw that there was a house really close by, but I figured that wouldn't matter until a guy walked out, and he seemed to be looking around as if he saw us. And was seeing if we were actually there, and it was at that point that I and my friend turned our flashlights off and stood low because the woods we were in are considered private property, and we didn't want to get in trouble for trespassing. But as we stood still for a while, I heard something walking in our direction, and at first I figured it was maybe a squirrel or rabbit scurrying around, but it didn't sound like a small animal, it sounded like a person walking through the leaves or something bigger. I'm not sure how to explain it, but it just sounded like something larger was walking in our direction, and that's when I told my friend we should head back, and he agreed, so we slowly backed up, and then whatever was walking stopped, and then when we started walking, it would start walking again too, and vice versa, but I know it wasn't the echo of our footsteps we were hearing because whatever was following us had a delay when it stopped walking, like it was trying to stay still with us, but it had a slow reaction time and didn't stop at the right time we did. Then I and my friend decided we didn't want to backtrack through this whole ditch with whatever this person or animal was following us, so we ran and climbed up the side of the ditch, which wasn't that steep, so we got up fairly easily and ran until we made it to a road and decided to call it a day and follow the road back to my house. But before we went back to my house, I wanted to look into the ditch from the high ground and see if I could see anything, but either whatever was in there was gone or it was just so dark that I couldn't see it. I'm still not sure what was in the ditch, and for all I know, it could have been someone from the house that was nearby checking if there were people in the private woods, but it definitely was odd that they were trying to make their presence unknown. I've gone in those woods plenty of other times after that and haven't come across anything like that since, so maybe something like that will never happen to me again. So I live in a house that backs up to a nature preserve that's about 50 feet from my pool cage. Around the pool cage there is some landscaping, and within that landscaping I have motion detector lights because sometimes my cats walk around the pool, and raccoons will come up to the cage to see them and cause problems. So a few nights ago we had a meteor shower, so I was sitting on my roof. My house is 2 stories, but there is a lower roof on the back of the house that I can climb out of a window onto, watching the sky, not seeing much, and some deer decided to walk by my lights. About 10 to 15 of them walk by and, of course, trigger the lights as they are motion detecting and walk off to the left of my house into the woods. About 5 minutes later, 2 of them come sprinting out of the woods and trigger the lights again. The rest of them follow, but it seems odd because they only run from people and coyotes, so I start paying close attention, thinking there may be someone in the woods coming toward my yard. After the last deer had run past my house, the lights shut off again. After about 30 seconds of staring into the darkness, I hear footsteps in the grass. They weren't a coyote, though, because it was very obvious that whatever was walking there had 2 legs. I could tell from the sound of the walking. That's not the creepy part. As the steps got closer, I fully expected my lights to turn on and see a person walking behind my house, but they never turned on. Like I mentioned before, the distance between my cage and the woods is about 50 feet, but these lights motion sense up to 250 feet, so they absolutely should have turned on just like for the deer. Whatever it was slowly walked past my house, and I went to grab an LED flashlight from my bedroom, but the time it took me to climb back through the window was too long because I couldn't hear the footsteps anymore and didn't see anything when I shined the flashlight. This has me pretty weirded out, and I was hoping someone could help me make sense of this. Chupacabra-like creature. Several years ago I was in Branson, Missouri, with my wife, then girlfriend, at her grandpa's 80th birthday celebration. After a day of go-karting, mini-golf, some shopping, and an incredibly delicious dinner on a riverboat, we stayed in some motel with my brother-in-law and his wife. It's around 11 p.m., and my wife and I decide to go for a late ice cream run to bring back for everyone. There was some grocery store not too far away, so we hopped in the car and took off. We pull around the corner in the parking lot and head down the aisle out to the road. We come up to the turn, and on the other side of the road is this small row of bushes. Peeking up over the top of the bush, head and long neck visible, is this weird creature with a really narrow face. It's really hard to describe, as it was dark, but there was a street light nearby giving some light. The best description I can manage is that it looked like a kangaroo but had a longer face/snout and smaller ears and had its mouth open a little like it was pissed. If it had teeth, they weren't very big or noticeable from that distance. It had dark eyes, and you could tell that it wasn't happy to see us coming down the road at its T-intersection. It was light brown or gray, with no discernible markings. I remember thinking that its long neck creeped me out. My wife, both of our eyes still locked on the creature, says, "What the hell is that? Are we looking at a chupacabra?" And I was like, I don't know. Is that what a chupacabra looks like? We both felt that it seemed predatory. The thing was popped up behind a row of bushes on the far left side of the row so that it was only barely hidden behind the start of the row. It then sprints off to the left, exposing its body as it goes across this small parking lot. The best way I can describe it is that it ran off like a big cat, completely outstretched on all fours, like the slow-motion cheetah videos you see online. I can see it playing back in my mind in slow motion. But it was more bouncy, like it leapt as it ran outstretched, if that makes sense. My wife and I were spooked pretty good. When we got out of the car at the store, we were looking all around us, fully expecting the thing to have somehow followed us and jump us in the parking lot. Of course it was nowhere to be found. We quickly grabbed some Reese's Klondike bars and headed back. We tell my brother-in-law and his wife what happened, and he wants to see it for himself. We grab some flashlights out of his trunk and head off into the night. My fear had turned to curiosity, that and my brother-in-law is a fairly big dude. Turns out the area that the creature ran off into is a golf course. What was weird is that it was the edge of a golf course, and there were a ton of large limbs down in that area, not sure if they had a storm recently or what. So there was this big leafy nest in the midst of the trees with all kinds of branches. We looked all over and spread out into two groups and searched across that part of the golf course. There was this creek along this thickly wooded area down below that could provide a lot of cover. Didn't find anything, but wow. Possible Skinwalker experience in Joshua Tree, California. I went to Joshua Tree a few days ago in an Airbnb with 3 of my friends. The house was spacious and accessible via an unpaved dirt road. The closest house to us was maybe a mile away. All houses in this area have private driveways too. On one of our drives back from getting groceries, an animal ran away from our headlights super fast, but I couldn't make it out. I assumed it was like a deer or something because of how big it was. But all I had seen in the desert were quails. No big animals. That night I had a dream that my friends and I were searching for something, and we were taken to a basement full of things, and there was a small house with a red door. We went inside, but I don't remember what was there. This may or may not have anything to do with my experience, but I read here that dreams do have a correlation. One of the nights of our stay, we had a bonfire and did some stargazing. At one point, I needed to urinate, so I went inside and stayed away for approximately 5 minutes. When my friend and I came back, my 2 other friends weren't sitting by the fire. I just sat and waited a couple of minutes for them to come back. I ended up going inside to check for them, but they weren't there. We went back outside and started calling for them, but received no response. Instead, we hear coughing close by the right side of the house where the pool was. We immediately knew it was our friend because they had been reserved. Our first instinct was to find them and help. At some points during the trip, we had become concerned that our friend was sick, but they ended up feeling a lot better. We start to go looking for them by the pool, but we call again, and in response we just hear the same cough, same pitch. It was the same cough maybe 4 or 5 times. We thought our friend was throwing up or maybe smoking. Usually when we called for them, they'd answer immediately, except for this time there was just more coughing. When we called last, they finally answered and came around the house, and we heard them walking and talking on the left side just after we heard coughing on the right side, and they were totally unaware of what was going on. They had no idea about the coughing and didn't even hear us calling until they got closer to the house. As soon as I realized the coughing was a lure for us, it confirmed that something had been keeping an eye on us. Based off of what I've read, I'm very sure I had a Skinwalker experience. My dad's 3 encounters with a hat man in the fields. These encounters happened to my father in the 80s in a village in Croatia. I will describe to you how his surroundings look to try and give you an image. My dad and his friends walked everywhere for most of his early life until he got a car in 1989, and he had 2 paths to take, one going through the woods for about 10 kilometers and the other going through the straight road 10 kilometers, with fields on the left and right sides. And there were no street lamps at the time in either of the 2 paths, and there were no street lamps in his village as well, so it was pitch black, and he went alone a lot, but what amazes me is that he was never scared until this encounter. First encounter. My dad, a typical teenager, was going home on foot at 3 in the morning from a party in a small town. His friends stayed, and he went because he had school that morning. Lol. As he was walking on the straight road path, he saw a man with a hat standing in the field to his left side about 15 meters from him. Just standing there randomly looking at him at 3 in the morning. My dad started running as fast as he could until he got home. He played soccer his whole life, so when I say that he was running, I mean running. Second encounter. Alone again, 4 in the morning this time in the straight path. He was casually walking, tired and dreaming of his bed, and then he heard 2 voices talking, which were his friends in the distance, so he ran to them to catch up, but every time he ran, they ran. He stopped and ran again, and they would too start running, so after he got to them at the end of that road, he was pissed off and asked them, "Why were you running?" They said, "Didn't you see the man in the hat running in the field next to you towards us?" Now he almost shat his pants. They say every time you ran, the man started running towards you and us. My dad says he gets the chills every time he recalls that event. Third encounter. As he was going from a party, the rain started pouring, and he and 4 girls went to his car, and he was going to take them home. So he is driving through that path with the fields, the rain is pouring, and as he is driving, he and the girl beside him see a man in a hat about 10 meters from the car get up from the right ditch by the side of the road and run to the left side of the road and into the ditch. He and the girl were terrified, but he kept on driving and didn't want to even look behind him because he was so scared. He asked the girl, "Did you see a man with a hat walk from the ditch to the other ditch?" She responds, "Yes, I did." Really, really creepy stuff. What do you guys think that was? Was that human, or? I'm eager to hear your thoughts on this matter. I like to take walks in the woods behind my house. It's not big, just a few acres, but it's enough for me. I have nice talks with my grandfather about his life in the woods before and after joining the Navy. I'm part Cherokee and Blackfoot Native American. He has recounted tales of him and his friends encountering supernatural occurrences. My grandpa, who embraces his native side, even stayed in the woods at times when he was a teenager and wasn't scared when either just he or he and his buddies saw or heard things that shouldn't be there. Like I previously stated, I do spend time in the woods behind my house. I've even brought up building a little tree house out there, something me and my brother or cousins can chill in while we're out there. I'm not as in touch with my native side as my grandpa, but I do believe in native stories, especially ones like wendigos, skinwalkers, and spearfinger. I'd go out and walk around if I'm by myself or chill, talk, and joke if I'm with my brother or cousins, but when I'm by myself, I always feel something or someone watching me. There's a saying/rule with natives, don't speak to whatever is following you, or you risk that thing getting more attracted to you. I forget or disregard this, and I speak to whatever or whoever is there. I do that because behind the barbed wire on the property line, there's a trail that belongs to our neighbors, so I check and make sure no one is where they're not supposed to be. So I talk to anything that's out there, and I know it's not an animal because my presence would be enough to scare them off, but yesterday I was out there doing what I've been doing, walking around looking around. I stopped by the property line. I had music in my headphones playing. I was looking for discoloration, differences in the shadows, or foliage shuffling and moving. I couldn't see anything. I start talking and asking what it is. I told it I was part Native American so I wouldn't go down without a fight. After saying that, I hear a tapping sound to my left, not far from where I was. I was armed, and with the pistol on my side, I took it and racked it. After that, I hear constant footsteps hitting the leaves. I stood in the same spot for 10 minutes at most. Whatever it was just pacing back and forth, stopping at random, and then continuing like it was debating or studying me from where I couldn't see it. I spent a little bit longer in the woods before I left back for my house. Honestly, I was a little bit creeped out. A troll-like humanoid encounter. This is an encounter my girlfriend and her friend had a few years ago, not mine personally. I'm a long-time lurker here, and I love listening to the stories about weird, unexplainable humanoid/creature encounters like Bigfoot, extraterrestrials, and the like. I've heard her tell this story a few times before, but after recently hearing them together describe what they saw, I thought maybe you guys would enjoy it. Perhaps someone has seen something similar. This encounter happened in Lakewood, New Jersey, a few years back. It was midday sometime in September. My girlfriend and her friend used to jog together regularly at local parks. The park they were at this particular day is called Lake Carasallo, which butts up to a housing development. The trail they were on loops around the lake, and 3/4 of the trail is basically just a normal paved sidewalk that follows a road but eventually turns to dirt and goes through a small wooded area on the far side of the lake, the other 1/4 of the trail. Mind you, this place is far from being remote. It is Jersey, after all. While jogging through the wooded part of the trail, they came upon a creepy, humanoid-looking figure on the edge of the trail that stopped them both in their tracks. They both keep referring to this thing as troll-like. It was short, maybe 4 feet tall at most. It was dressed in a long black hooded cloak, hunched over, sitting on a wooden chest, yes, a wooden ducking chest. Exactly the kind you'd imagine a troll to be sitting on. They said they could not see any face at all because its head was directed at the ground and the hood was too long, but what they did notice was the cloak was short enough to see part of its legs, and it was wearing what looked like regular flesh-colored stockings and had very small clubbed feet. Its legs had large, protruding boils or tumor-like lumps on the exposed area. It was wearing blue gloves too. Terrified, they eventually made their way past this thing, coming only a few feet from it, hoping it wouldn't jump out at them. Then they noped the hell out of there faster than they've ever run before. It didn't say anything or try to cause them any harm. It just sat there hunched over. They thought at first maybe it's just a mannequin or something someone put there as a joke, but they noticed hand movement right before they passed it. Needless to say, they have never gone back to this lake ever again. Every time my girlfriend talks about this encounter, I can hear the fear in her trembling voice, and she was obviously somewhat traumatized by the encounter. Even though I geek out about these types of stories all the time, she has absolutely zero interest in any of these types of things. She will roll her eyes or shake her head and tell me I'm crazy when I tell her about a cool story of Bigfoot or aliens or whatever that I read about, trying to pique some interest in her on these types of subjects. However, she continues to want nothing of it. I'm a very open-minded person when it comes to this stuff. I can't say I believe in anything because I've never had a convincing encounter aside from hearing a few strange sounds in the woods I couldn't explain. I always ask myself, is it possible creatures/aliens/Bigfoot exist? The answer is usually yes. But then again, someone just playing a prank to mess with people is extremely more logical sometimes, especially in a place like New Jersey. It's a cool story nonetheless, and I'm always fascinated, true or not. While it is uncertain whether this phenomenon fits into the category of cryptozoology, there have been documented sightings of beings known as the Dark Watchers for centuries along the central coast of California, specifically on the Big Sur coast. The landscape is very mountainous and remote when you veer off Highway 1. The sightings have reported seeing very tall, shadowy beings with steepled hats at the tops of the mountain peaks. They're looking out towards the ocean or directly at the observer, watching, standing very still, and tending to vanish quickly after being noticed. Skeptics could say the shadows from the mountains themselves could be the source of this phenomenon. However, that still doesn't change the fact that sightings have been documented from the Esselen and Chumash Indian tribes that inhabited the area hundreds of years ago, through Spanish colonization all the way to modern day. The Spanish in the 1800s called them Los Vigilantes Obscuros, and in fact, the renowned author John Steinbeck, who grew up in the area in the early 1900s, wrote about his mother having had several encounters in the San Lucia Mountains with the entities. Supposedly they are not dangerous but extremely creepy. Reported incidents have described hair-raising, and obvious feelings of being watched by something otherworldly. Mind you that encounters happen in very remote areas of the mountains that typically require long hikes in and out. If you get spooked, you're likely looking at a long hike back to your car and a long car ride back to town. I had an odd experience in my yard that I thought I'd share with you all. I went out in my front yard last night, this morning, around 2 a.m. to throw a large item in the trash can. Our outdoor trash can and recycling can are in front of our house up against a double window/bay style window, just to give you some context. Since moving into this house last March, each one of my family members and I has had strange experiences either separately or together, and I want to start sharing them here. Anyway, I've had creepy feelings outside of my house late at night and have heard strange sounds that aren't like any animal I can think of, and my husband has as well. As I was placing the item in the trash, it got dead silent outside. Since it's been unseasonably warm, the crickets and other critters are making their music right now in the evenings and nighttime, and they all suddenly stopped. Then I got this feeling like the entire world around me shrunk, and I got very claustrophobic even though I was standing in the huge front yard. We have a very busy road that our dead-end street pours out onto. The other end of the road is a dead end, as I mentioned, and there's a lot of woods around us. I couldn't even hear the traffic from the busy main road anymore. Every damn noise stopped. All I could hear was my heart pounding so loud in my ears that I thought my head was going to explode. My knees got extremely weak, and I started shaking uncontrollably. All due to something that I couldn't see, but my soul obviously knew I was in danger. I started looking around and walking back up the ramp and onto my front patio/porch, and that's when I heard it. This low, raspy breathing/gurgling noise? It sounded like it was just beyond the porch, right near the trash cans I was just standing near. Couldn't see anything, and I ran in my ducking house and locked that shit up tight. I'm telling you guys. There's something out there, and my family and I aren't losing it. My 4-year-old has come out of her room screaming that there's a shadow outside her window, and my 6-year-old refuses to have her bed near the window. She gets even more freaked out when it rains. Not sure if that means anything to anyone. My husband and I have heard a very terrible growling noise outside of our bedroom window, and we've both heard something walking around outside on 2 ducking feet. Still haven't seen shit though. What the hell is lurking out there? During the summer between my sophomore and junior years of high school, my cousin, our friends, and I were hanging out at my friend's house late one night. We were playing video games, watching TV, and just generally being high school guys. Around 1 a.m., my cousin and I decided that we were going to leave and walk to our grandmother's house, which was probably about a 15-minute walk from my friend's house. After saying our goodbyes, we left and started walking down the dark main road that would eventually lead to my grandmother's house. We talked and laughed about the day, and everything seemed fine, but as we kept walking closer to this auto parts place down the hill off the side of the road, I could make out that there were about 3 people in dark clothing just standing there quietly talking to each other. We kept walking, and being the paranoid kid I was, and still am, I just told my cousin to walk and look straight ahead. As we passed them, they all seemed to notice that we were there, and out of nowhere all I could hear was this low, really deep, demonic chant being spoken. My eyes got super wide, and all I could think to do was keep walking, look straight, and get the hell as far as I could away from them. As this was going on, my cousin whispered to me and asked, "Do you hear that shit?" All I could do was quietly whisper to keep walking and look straight ahead. I was crapping myself and didn't know what the hell was going on. Eventually, after about 5 minutes, we were walking along again in the dark and thought we were in the clear, but literally in the dark with only the moon lighting the way, we heard from somewhere in the woods a loud scream of someone yelling, "Yee-haw!" And as soon as I heard this, I immediately took off running down the road, leaving my cousin in a state of shock and awe. As soon as he realized I was running, he took off after me, and I slowed down so that he could catch up. He asked if I heard that, and all I could say was to keep running. Eventually we made it to the street my grandmother lived on and cut into some bushes near the street. As we crouched down trying to catch our breath, we could see a car driving slowly down the road where we had come from, and it looked to be one of the same cars that was in the parking lot of the auto parts store where the 3 people had been. We stayed low, and eventually they kept going, and my cousin and I made it to my grandma's house and promptly passed out from all the excitement. We never told anyone about the experience, mostly because we knew that no one would believe us and because we couldn't believe it ourselves. I often wonder what those people in the auto parts parking lot were really doing and what they would have done if they caught up to us. Why I never go into the woods by myself. I live in the old town of Whitehaven, Pennsylvania. I live in the nicer part of town next to a lake. Every day I run around it, but when I get to the part where I turn around, I avoid the woods. My first encounter with the area was shortly after my family moved in. We decided to go on a walk and meet new neighbors. On the walk we noticed a dismembered doll on the side of the road. We brushed it off as the neighborhood kids, even though my older sister and I were the only kids. A few years later, when I was around 12, my cousins and I were playing in the woods. I have never gone that far out in the woods. I was around 3/4 of a mile in the woods when I saw a doll just sitting there. I was over a little outlook when I saw the creepy shit. On the ground, there was a collection of headless dolls arranged in the shape of a pentagram. My cousins saw me and came to see what I was seeing. When they said it, the oldest one picked me up and bolted. I haven't given it any thought of this experience until I was writing this. My second story was when I was with my friend. My friend and I were just walking through the woods when he told me he felt uncomfortable. Today was a particularly windy day. After he said that, the wind just stopped, and all we could hear was us talking and the crunch of our feet on the dead leaves and twigs of the dirt path. I needed to use the bathroom, so we stopped. There was no walking, he was just waiting for me. Then we heard crunching in the woods and got the sudden feeling that someone was watching us. On the way back we heard some glass shatter and an inhuman scream. As soon as my friend and I heard that, we booked it. When we got back to my house, my friend told me he saw a black figure and that we should never go back there. Weird creature in the forest/jungle of El Salvador. This story was told to me by my uncle, and he swears it really happened. He was the only one in the family this happened to, so no one else could back his story. I don't know if I believe this myself. In 1979 there was a 12-year-long civil war in El Salvador. My uncle was in the military. He was sent to the woods/jungle with, 6 other guys to go look for militia groups that were supposedly camping out there. After walking in the woods/jungle for hours, they suddenly felt the ground shake as if something big was coming towards them. He described it like in Jurassic Park when the T-Rex was coming towards them and the water rippled. He said they thought it was the enemy doing something, so they hid. He said that he was shocked when he saw a giant. He said it was walking in the distance. I asked him if it was just maybe a really, really big person like Bigfoot, and he said no. It was more of a Jack and the Beanstalk kind of giant. He said there were trees blocking the view somewhat, but that he could make out that it was like a really big human. He said it was as tall as the tallest tree there. He said he was scared and didn't want to come out of hiding when he saw what it was. He said the giant basically just walked past them. He said they were all terrified and waited there for a while as they were scared to bump into another one. He said two of the guys suggested trying to kill it to get rich, but the person in charge told them to stand down. My uncle said everyone thought they were idiots for suggesting such a thing. He said they walked back to base as quickly and quietly as possible. They told everyone when they got back, but no one believed them. They were friends with the pilots. And the pilots called bullshit on their story because they fly over the jungle all the time and would have seen such a creature, especially if it was as tall as the trees, as they claimed. He said all of the guys described what they saw. One guy claimed that it appeared bald. Another guy said he thinks it had some sort of loincloth like Tarzan. My uncle emphasized that he didn't get a good look. And all he knows is that the ground was shaking as if some really big creature was coming towards them. He saw what appeared to be a giant human walking in the distance. He got down and hid and waited until it was gone. I began to ask him things like, if it was real, don't you think they would have found a body or some bones of something that big? Especially since El Salvador is so tiny in relation to other parts of the world. He responded along the lines of I don't know about none of that stuff, I just know what I saw that day. I don't know how I feel about this one personally. This one seems a little out there. My mom said maybe it was some sort of spirit that just made itself appear as a giant to scare them. During the Civil War times, my mom claims there were a lot more paranormal things going on because of all the deaths that were happening. A lot of innocent people were being killed. My grandma would say if you looked out the window of the house, you would see dead bodies on the street. That wouldn't explain the ground shaking, though. Has anyone ever encountered a story of a Jack and the Beanstalk kind of giant? This one scared me as a kid because it's so unbelievable that if he did actually see that, that's crazy. Heard crying while turkey hunting. I've hunted turkeys for years. Mostly in Oklahoma in spots local to me. I'm an Okie born and raised. Anyway, this happened a while back when I was a young man. Right at the start of turkey season in a spot I got permission to hunt. I pulled up way before daylight, parked off a dirt road, and walked into the woods. If you know turkey hunting, it's a game of patience. Get set up, get quiet, start calling, and wait. I set my decoys out in a little clearing and tucked myself back against a big old oak tree. Morning mist was clinging to everything, real thick that day. The eerie atmosphere was somewhat unusual for the hunting location I was in. Once it was time, I did a few soft yelps on my call, just trying to coax a long beard in. Not 5 minutes later, I heard a distant gobble. Adrenaline kicked in. Then, right after that, I heard something else, crying. Like human crying. The sound was faint, yet it was enough to stop me in my tracks. Initially, I believed the sound was either a strange bird I had never encountered or possibly a coyote making noise. I've heard coyotes make some freaky noises when they get riled up. So I shook it off and kept hunting. But then it came again. This time, it was more distinct. It wasn't an animal. It was human. It sounded like a baby or a tiny kid crying somewhere behind me in the trees. At that point I was concerned. I figured maybe someone's kid had wandered off from one of the homes around there or something. You never know. It did scare me, but I was more worried that a kid was in the woods alone and by themselves. I have nieces, nephews, and younger cousins, so it stirred something in me. I got my gun and started picking my way through the brush, following the sound. I kind of had to fight my way through a briar patch and some cedars, which isn't ever fun, but it was definitely crying I was hearing. I finally came to an old oak tree. It was twisted all up, old as hell. It looked like it had been struck by lightning at some point. There was a hollow near the base, big enough to crawl into if you wanted. The crying sounded like it was coming from inside that hollow. I just stood there, heart pounding, trying to see anything in the dark hole. I was honestly trying to work up the courage to look inside. But before I could even take a step closer, the crying stopped. It was as if someone had flicked a switch. Dead silence. I backed up really slow. I didn't turn my back until I got some distance between me and that tree. I started to call my dad, but the whole thing left me feeling crazy. I felt like I imagined it, but I know what I heard. I grabbed my gear and hiked out fast. I didn't engage in any hunting activities for the remainder of the day. A month or two later I was talking to a buddy of mine at his house. We were getting ready to go fishing, and his uncle was out there holding court around the tailgate of his truck. We got to talking, and I told him about it, and he got real quiet. He's full-blooded Seminole. I'm not sure how familiar you folks are with Oklahoma's history, but the Seminoles were one of the tribes that were sent here in the 1800s. I was searching for land that once belonged to the Seminoles and an area where they might have settled. Anyways, he explained quietly, almost reverently, that the Seminole people traditionally buried stillborn babies in the hollows of trees, believing the trees protected the tiny souls until they could pass on peacefully. I still get chills thinking about it. I don't think what I heard was trying to scare me. I think it just was. It lingers like a long-forgotten sorrow. When I am in the woods, I sometimes still think of that tree and the tiny voice that it holds gently within. It reminds me that even places we believe we know intimately can hold mysteries beyond our understanding, and that not every unexplained sound in the wild is meant to harm us. I've thought about it a lot, and the best I can come up with is that some things are simply meant to be remembered, respected, and left in peace. Has anyone else ever heard anything similar? Location: Pennsylvania, a state park, summer 1999, 11 p.m. In 1999 I was working at a state park in Pennsylvania and got to know the back areas of it pretty well, the areas most tourists do not get to see. Approximately 1 mile from the park on a long, all-dirt road was a large clearing in the woods, which was cleared for power lines and gas well use. Once you got to that spot, you would have to walk over a long hill until you came to an old abandoned trail. If you followed this trail, it would take you deep into the forest. One day I followed it and found that it led to an old, dilapidated cabin, not on the park cabin records, and it looked like it hadn't been used for many decades. Even though it was daylight, I still got this creepy feeling like I shouldn't be there, and worse, that something was watching every move I made. A few weeks later, while I was off duty, 2 of my friends and I were just out driving around enjoying the summer night, and since I knew all the back roads, I was taking them on kind of a tour. Note, none of these roads are off limits or secret, so I wasn't breaking any rules. Other than that mysterious cabin, the park doesn't have any secrets. About 11 p.m. I came to that familiar clearing, and I mentioned something about the old cabin. Being a brave soul, I talked them into letting me show them the cabin, so I grabbed my flashlight, and we took off down the hill and onto the path that led to the cabin. I took the lead, and we walked halfway when all of a sudden my light flashed on something on the right side of the path. Almost immediately I stopped and said, "Did you just see that?" To which they responded, "See what?" As I panned the light back to the right side of the road, I said, "That. There, standing by a tree, was a creature only seen in sci-fi movies. It had grayish olive-colored skin and was very thin in its extremities. The calves and forearm muscles were very large, as was the chest. The face was the strangest thing since it had the typical alien gray head shape, but there was no mouth. It had a nose that was long and thin but not longer than its chin. The eyes had a reddish gleam in the light but were not the size of most reported aliens, very small even by human standards. I hate to make this reference for fear of questioning my sanity, but my best description was like what the goons look like in the Popeye cartoon. It leans oddly against the tree, like if you were leaning on an armchair with only one arm. To make another TV show reference, but like the Fonz would lean on the jukebox on Happy Days, minus the legs being crossed. Immediately everyone wanted to leave, but as we turned, my flashlight went out. My friends told me to quit messing with them and turn the light back on, to which I informed them that I wasn't messing with them and to keep moving now that I was at the back of the group. I frantically continued to beat on my flashlight, trying to make it work again. As soon as it came back on, I immediately swiveled back around to shine it behind us. The creature had moved up significantly and now was on the left side. We hurried to the clearing, and once we got back up the hill and to the main dirt road, things got worse. Out of the woods we had just come through was this high-pitched, blood-curdling screeching noise, which, after it started, others started to answer back from the other side of the clearing. The fact that I was a park ranger, had been in the woods all my life, and had my degree from Penn State in wildlife management means I've heard a lot of noises in the wild but have never heard that sound before. I know it wasn't any kind of owl or bobcat, bear, bird, porcupine, you get the drift. Once I told my dad about the encounter, he told me it could have been the chupacabras, which I had never heard of before, and as far as aliens go, I never believed in them until recently. Months went by without incident, apart from not being able to shake that "I'm watching you" feeling. I was to the point of feeling like I was being stalked. One night, while I was getting something from my truck, I looked into the woods and saw reddish glowing eyes staring at me from the shadows. I immediately ran into the house and grabbed my biggest knife. I'm not a gun guy, to which my dad asked me what I was doing. I told him I was tired of feeling stalked and was going to face this thing. He told me he was coming with me, but all along I knew he never truly believed me or my encounter. When we got outside, he nonchalantly asked, "Okay, where did you see this thing?" And I pointed to the spot to which he directed his flashlight. To his shock, it was there, and when the light hit it, it fled into the woods. My dad, an ex-Marine who served proudly during Vietnam, yelled at me to get back into the house with fear in his voice. To this day it still creeps me out telling this encounter, and my hands shake even while typing while recalling it all. I am now in my 30s with a wife and kids, but even now, when I go outside at night, I still feel watched to the point that when I get a really strong feeling, my wife won't let me leave the house without her. Just as a side note, for the first 5 years of our relationship, she too would catch sight of this creature, but mostly as it was going into the shadows. To clarify, there were no drugs, alcohol, or other substances involved in this or any other encounter. Friends in the woods. I suppose I should explain why I decided to share my experiences on here with strangers. Essentially, I just want to see who might have had a similar experience and compare similarities. I don't care whether you believe me or not. About 10 years ago, my friends and I encountered numerous strange and unexplainable experiences in the painfully rural town where we grew up. I won't go into detail on them unless people care enough to ask. Instead, I will focus on one particular incident that happened in the very beginning. I had recently gone through a terrible breakup and was couch surfing with a few friends I had. We were a small, extremely tight group of friends, and we basically lived together half the time anyways. At my friend's house it was me, Zach, my friend, Eugene, his brother, Ben, and about a 10-minute drive away, our other friend, Adam. We live in the deep south and love hunting and just generally being in the woods and ducking off. So around 9:30 Eugene's girlfriend left, and it was just us dudes. We all worked shit jobs but had saved up our money and bought ourselves some super heap guns, Wasser 1063s for me and Adam. And we were itching to shoot some coyotes or deer or really anything. Ben wasn't there, he worked late at a pharmacy about 40 minutes away. It wasn't uncommon for him to close early and get home at 10 or to stay super late and not get home until midnight. It was just me, Eugene, and Adam. Eugene's house was a little ways in the woods. You walk towards the highway, and you'll be walking past tons of houses. You walk in the opposite direction, and it's a couple hundred acres of woods and the occasional fire break. Now we never went far in the woods before because we didn't have guns and the woods were kind of scary. We mostly stayed inside playing Halo and other video games and nerd stuff. But for some reason that night we decided to go to Eugene's grandfather's old house that was deep in the woods. We had been there once or twice during the day, and it wasn't that big of a deal. Even at night. We get there. We look around. Ain't shit. No coyotes, no boar, no nothing. So the three of us start walking back. As we get to the edge of the woods right beside Eugene's main house that we lived in, we hear voices. We stop and listen. Expecting to see Ben walk out of the carport and feed the animals. We would have probably scared him by jumping out of the woods or letting off a round or two. Then it happens. A voice sounding exactly like Eugene's begins to call my name. Zach? Zach, are you there? All three of us get low and get deathly quiet. We are freaked out. My hands are shaking a little. I don't know why I'm scared. My mind is saying that clearly it is Ben. They're brothers. They can sound similar. Right? Then, as if to prove me wrong, the voice switches to Adam's and begins calling for both me and Eugene. Zach? Eugene? Where are you guys? I look back at Adam to be 200% sure that he is right beside me, white as a sheet and shaking with fear as well. We sit there. For about 5 minutes listening to multiple voices talk. No more mimicking us or whatever. Adam, always the braver or dumber, you choose, stands up, grabs my shoulder, and lifts me up, and we start to head towards the house. Eugene follows closely behind, holding onto my shoulder. We get to the carport. Empty. We cleared the entire exterior of the house with our rifles. Then we do the same to the inside. We checked every nook, cranny, closet, washing machine cabinet, pantry, and shower to ensure that no one was present. We checked the attic and the crawlspace above the carport. Everything. We found nothing. When Ben got home, we told him what had happened. He didn't believe us. Tried to reason that it was a TV or radio or echoing sound or any number of things. The three of us all slept in a barricaded room that night, with our weapons in our beds. Many things happened after that. Mostly circumstantial, but some irrefutable, that something was going on. Feel free to ask questions. This happened to my father-in-law probably 10 years ago at our hunting camp in Alabama. As we prepare to head there tomorrow for a few days of deer hunting, the incident suddenly came to mind. He asked me to go ahead and share his story. It's short, but as I get a little creeped out in the woods, this would have freaked me out. So, as some people probably know, We get out an hour or so before light and climb into a tree stand, a ladder leading up to a seat in a tree, usually fairly deep in the woods, to hunt. This foggy morning, my father-in-law has been in his stand for a couple of hours, and it was getting light, and he was reading a book as he waited for something to happen. Out of the fog he hears a woman's voice, much closer than anyone should have been to him at the time. She is calling, "Ha Hunter, oh ha Hunter." Very sing-songy, like a mother calling her child in for dinner as he played outside. Now, as I said, he is pretty deep in the woods, and there are sticks and dried leaves everywhere. You generally make a pretty good racket getting to your stand, which is why we go out so early. Not only that, but in order to know where he was and spot him camouflaged in a tree, she must have seen his light when he walked out, followed him into the woods, and waited hours before calling to him. His first thought was that the woman was calling someone named Hunter, maybe her son. She called again, and he realized that he was the hunter. So he turns around, peers around the trees, and sees a young woman. She, in very few words and halting speech, explains that something is wrong with her hot water heater and asks if he can come look. Now the strangeness of the situation hadn't set in yet, and he's a give the shirt off his back kind of guy, not to mention 6 feet 2 inches and nearing 300 pounds. And has a gun, so he wasn't too worried about this small woman and starts getting down the tree to go have a look. He follows her back to her mobile home, which borders our hunting land, probably a 10-minute walk, and she walks inside and leaves the door open. He is trailing behind a little, so he gets to the door, kind of knocks, sticks his head in, and says hello. No answer. Where he entered is a laundry room, and he can see there in the room is a hot water heater, and water is just pouring out of a valve at the bottom. Just absolutely pouring out onto the floor. He walks over, turns the valve off, sticks his head in the house to say hello again, and nothing. No answer. The house seems empty. Empty of people anyway, but it is a disaster inside. At this point, he begins to realize how strange everything is and concludes that this situation could lead to being robbed or murdered, so he quickly leaves and hurries back to our cabin. Now we have hunted this land for years since and we have never seen anyone at this place, although until this season it has shown obvious signs of being lived in, so every time I pass by her place, which backs up right to the road we take to our hunting stands, I think, lady in the trailer with the messed up plumbing who may or may not have had nefarious intentions for my father-in-law, let's please not meet. I saw what felt like the spirit that guards the land around my house. This happened on August 27, 2024, in the state of Oklahoma in the US. I live in a rural area that is currently being made into a big town. New stores, new neighborhoods, the whole nine. It's still in the early days, so it's all under construction, so my neighborhood still has woodlands on one side and just open land for a few miles on another. Since the first night I've come out here I've always felt like I'm being watched if I'm outside. Sometimes it's not as direct, as if it's acknowledging my presence, but I'm not its priority, if that makes sense. But other times it felt like I was the only thing it was looking at. Especially at night. I have done foolish things, such as challenging it by walking further out into my yard, which is scattered with trees, and blocking the moonlight in certain areas. Although some of those times were on purpose, I had to feel comfortable walking into my own backyard. So each time I did, I stayed longer, and further out until I finally got freaked out and went back inside. The entire time I state my intent, whether I'm just going to retrieve something or simply saying I'm only walking because this is my backyard, but I mean no disrespect. I even began to say that I respected its presence and I don't mind it staying, but I don't appreciate it trying to make me feel scared in my own home. While I acknowledge this was its home first, my situation was not one of choice of me living here specifically. I made this known every time I felt its presence prioritize me. This has been happening for a while now. But its threatening/protective presence began to fade, and it was more of a curiosity. At least it felt that way to me. I may be misinterpreting it, but the threat and fear presence started to go away. And while it started out happening only at night, I began to feel it around me during the day. When this started happening, I started finding feathers on the ground. While, yes, I live where a lot of birds are, I haven't found any in the time I've been living here until this happened. Each time I was genuinely ecstatic to find one. It started out with just 1 or 2 a day and then increased to about 10 a day. I have a full jar full of feathers now. It was mostly blue jays for a while, and then others started appearing. I literally turned around, and an owl feather was floating in the air in front of me. I just stared at it while it landed softly on the ground. This was my absolute favorite one to find so far. Even trumping the raven and juvenile hawk feather I have. After finding the one owl feather, I found about 5 smaller tufts of owl feathers the next day. This continued happening for a few months with the blue jay feathers. And as it's begun to turn colder, there are fewer birds. One day, a couple weeks after the owl feathers, I was taking my dogs outside and was just walking through the yard, talking to my dogs, as any slightly sane person does, and I felt its presence again. I smiled because at this point it's become familiar, and I enjoy it. Well, out of the corner of my eye, something moves. While I have always felt its presence, I have never had such a physical reaction as I did when I turned to watch this figure step out from behind a tree on the opposite end of the yard from me. I feel the goosebumps form on my arm as if ice had just been brushed across them. Every single hair on my arms, neck, and back of my head stood. I stared and had trouble understanding what I was seeing for a second. Across the yard stood a figure with furs draped across them and hide clothes. They had bones and sticks tied in places, and on their head sat a skull with the biggest antlers I've ever seen. Their eyes lay behind the sockets, as if wearing them as a mask. It locked eyes with me, nodded, took a step, and disappeared. 2 of my dogs were barking at something across the street while my third, who is very independent and doesn't like to cuddle, watched this thing and stepped closer to me. So I know I saw it, because my dog acknowledged it. But it's still throwing me for a loop. Something creepy happened in a remote Belarusian village 17 years ago. So, this incident happened about 17 years ago during summer break. My friend and I went to visit another friend who was staying in this tiny, remote village in Belarus for the summer. The house was his grandparents', and the whole place felt super isolated. Honestly, it was actually a lot of fun at first. We went swimming at a nearby lake every day, and at night we'd stay up late just sitting by the water, listening to the kind of deafening silence you only get in the countryside, and talking for hours. During the day, we'd go mushroom picking, explore the area, take pictures, and just make some really good memories together. We stayed for a few weeks, but then one of my friends had to leave early because of some family stuff. The only way out was a bus that came twice a week, and she missed it. So she came back to our friend's place and asked if we could walk her to a nearby highway to try to hitch a ride. The main road was about 7 miles away, so we started walking. When we arrived, it was midweek and no cars passed, most people were still at work. As it got later, we decided to just walk back. During our return journey, we traversed several partially deserted neighboring villages. Honestly, it was quite eerie, but we kept ourselves occupied by singing and joking around to distract ourselves from the fear. It was getting dark, and we still had about 4 miles left. Then we found ourselves on a road flanked by dense forest on both sides. Suddenly, we started hearing noises coming from the trees. It was pitch dark and, honestly, pretty unsettling. We tried to joke about it, but deep down, we all felt something was off. Then my friend pointed, and we saw 2 huge yellow eyes staring at us from the trees. We just kept walking in silence for a bit until one of us nervously said, "Must be some wild fireflies messing with us." We laughed, but we all knew those definitely weren't fireflies. Keep in mind, this was before cell phones, so there was no way for us to call anyone. We just had to keep moving and get back safely. As we got closer to the village, 2 of us heard a female voice coming from the forest. We looked at each other, both realizing we had heard the voice, while our third friend continued talking and remained unaware of it. I got goosebumps. It sounded so real, and it was even creepier that I wasn't the only one who heard it. We didn't say anything until we got back to the house. Here's where it gets even weirder. In Slavic folklore, there's not just the Leshy, the forest spirit who protects the woods and sometimes plays tricks on people, but also the Rusalka. Rusalki are these mythological female spirits often connected to lakes and rivers. Usually described as beautiful women with long hair, Rusalki are known to entice people, particularly at night, with their singing or voices. After spending many nights at the lake, hearing a mysterious female voice coming from the trees later on definitely made us wonder if we had gotten too close to something supernatural. It definitely made us wonder if we'd gotten a little too close to something supernatural. We still joke about those unhinged fireflies, but deep down, we all know we saw and heard something we can't explain. Between the abandoned houses, the glowing eyes in the forest, and that eerie female voice, it was honestly one of the scariest and strangest experiences of my life. And yeah, I still think about those nights at the lake and wonder what might have been watching, or listening to, us from the darkness. Creepy encounter near my home. So this happened about 21 years ago, when I was around 9 years old, but I still vividly remember that day. I was with my grandmother and her dog, a big black Great Dane. We were walking on the side of a little country road in the middle of the woods, 20 minutes from my house. We used to come here to pick up chestnuts. At a point the dog went a little further into the woods, and I started to follow him. At the same time, a car arrived on the road and stopped. I looked at my grandma, and she made me a sign to tell me to stay where I was. I saw her talking with the driver. He looked like a middle-aged man. From where I was, I couldn't hear exactly what they were saying, but I heard my grandma raise her voice. I saw the man open his car door. I was sure he was going to grab my grandmother. I was so scared. She screamed at me to run into the woods, but a big dark shadow ran into the guy. It was the dog. I think he heard the panic in my grandma's voice and that he understood there was a danger. The guy got scared and quickly closed the car door, then got out. I asked my grandmother what happened. She just told me that he was a crazy man and that we should go home through the woods and stay away from the road. She also told me to stay close to the dog. Thankfully we got home and didn't see the man again. From this day we never went picking up chestnuts in this area again, and we stopped doing walks around the house for many years. And we never went walking anywhere else without a dog. I think that's also why I remember this day so precisely. Even if I never saw that man again, he left after him a feeling of danger around our home for a very long time. A few minutes encounter turned into years of fear. Fun fact, despite his size, the dog was usually a completely harmless dog who got scared of everything, even cats or chickens. But that day he was the bravest dog on earth. 14 years ago, I saw something in the woods. Sometimes it is in my nightmares. Allow me to explain. My family lived in a 2-story house with a huge yard, about 40 yards from a highway. The highway is above the first floor, but the second floor sees the highway. My grandpa lived with his old aunt on the first floor, and my family lived on the second floor. There is an old mountain, not too steep, it's climbable, and on the other side are some fields and houses, and it's full of trees/forest. The area there was not that big, about half a mile by half a mile. There are roads separating it from another forest that is much bigger, and not many people go there. This area is not a large town, it consists of a small town and several local villages. My story. I was about 16 or 17, can't remember the month. My dad told me to get some firewood, as my grandpa hurt his back while we were fixing a grid holding our firewood that we used to keep our house warm. Anyways, my grandpa forgot to do it, and it was chilly that night, so I took a flashlight and walked to the firewood pile. It was by the highway so a tractor could transport it easier. As I said, I took the flashlight and walked there. This mountain closer to us mostly had rabbits and hedgehogs and few stray deer. When I got there, I started taking some firewood, and because I was scared of the dark, horror movies, I would look around my back in case something would come up to me and grab me or something. I heard something in the woods, right by the highway. I dropped all the firewood I held and pointed my flashlight at the place I heard something coming from. I saw it. It was a dark, shadowy figure. The best I can explain it is not very tall, about 5 and something feet, couldn't tell exactly, the whole thing was black, only you could see the light of my flashlight bouncing off its eyes, like those of a dog or cat. It was a little chubby for its size. Human-like hands that it quickly raised to cover its eyes, and then it ran off. I just ran as fast as possible, leaving firewood behind and going into Grandpa's house. I told him what I saw, crying a little. He told me, I know. I never thought it would get this close to us. Whispery Woods and a Shadow of Doubt. Based on true events, August 2017, Vernonia, Oregon. It was me and my husband camping on his friend's property. She had acres and acres of raw nature, an old logging beautiful creek, but something was off and dark about this place. I'm pretty perceptive to these things. I just couldn't put my finger on it yet. So we decided to take a walk and explore our surroundings. Something was off, I thought out loud. My husband said no, his denial so visible. We walked across the highway on someone else's property. We saw wildflowers, squirrels, different species of birds, and sounds of wildlife nature should sound. We finally spotted some deer and elk, and after playing, we walked back to where we were camping. Silence. All we heard were our own movements, the crunches of leaves and rocks, and every breath each of us took. That's it, I said, a little loud and excited. What? My husband asked. Listen, I said. He looks at me like I'm crazy and says, I don't hear anything. That's exactly what I mean, not a chirp, no movements of squirrels, nothing. And we all know animals know before we do when trouble, evil, is near. Don't be silly, my husband says. No, I'm serious. Something isn't right. So we built our fire, cooked our supper, and then called it a night. It was so warm that night, unbearable, so we slept nude. I cuddled up to my husband and fell right to sleep. I never checked the time, but I'm sure it was late, for we went to sleep around 7, still a little daylight out. So as I was sound asleep, lying on my side, something that felt somewhat heavy, like a big house cat with wiry hair, almost like a Brillo pad, and its tail dropped to the small of my back, startled me. It was a little heavy. It was pitch black in our tent, I couldn't see a thing. I was frightened to my core. I tried to, but I couldn't. I was trying to wake my husband, but I couldn't, so I spoke the Lord's Prayer in my head over and over. Then I was able to move. I started to pull and rock my husband. I still couldn't speak. I grabbed him and rocked him until he woke. Then finally I was able to shout, "It's on me. Something is on me." And I'm breathing heavily as if I were being suffocated, and he turned the light on, and nothing was there. I'm scared, I'm wanting to leave as my husband is trying to comfort me. As he looks scared himself, I try to forget about it. 2 nights passed. My husband and I got into and I stayed the night up at a friend's house, they're on the same property. Early the next morning I walked to our camp. My husband was still snoozing. I'm admiring the sunrise. I'm kind of squatting next to this old tree stump smoking the rest of my cigarette. I rise up. Now this old tree stump was almost as tall as me, and I'm 5 foot. Gray color reminds me of bone. Well, right as I step on my lit cigarette butt, this tree or something whispers twice, loud and clear as if it was a shout, "Are you done yet?" Before I could react, it whispered again, "Are you done here yet?" I was only 4 feet from the tent. As I approached, hubby was waking. He saw my troubled face and saw something disturbing in me and asked if I was okay, and no matter how his denial about my findings was, I still told him, and he believed me. It was August 18th, my birthday was the 19th. We packed up a backpack and hitchhiked out of there to where my mom lived. Her birthday was the 23rd, about 40 minutes away. We finally made it. Making it a birthday weekend for my mom and myself. Mom makes dinner, the 3 of us are at the table drinking a beer and catching up. And my mom says, "Deborah Denise Roney," looking at me sharply, with wondering eyes, and asks, "Were you in some type of trouble the other night? I felt your fear, your troubles." A bad feeling came over me, waking me out of my sleep. I looked at her, and she looked again. "Are you sure?" As her brows raised in question. My husband shouts with excitement, "Yes, yes," and he had told her everything about what happened with the creature on top off, its tail falling to the small of my back, all of it. She then asked if I smelled anything, a bad smell, death, or rotten garbage. And I told her, "No, Mom, I'm not even sure if I was breathing." She looked scared, as if she knew what this was. And got all antsy, nervous, and frightened, scurried to the stove, her back to us. She said in a low but firme, "I suggest you two not go back there. Do you hear me, Denise Roney?" And I look at my husband with a beer to my lip as I calmly, "I hear you." And none of us spoke of it again, and we never returned to Vernonia, Oregon. I feel those whispering woods were spiritually guiding us away from danger, warning us in a way. I believe that without a shadow of a doubt. I saw an identical copy of myself in the woods when I was 12. Exactly as the title says, I saw an identical copy of myself when I was 12. I was living in PA, getting ready to move to NC. I was living in a townhouse at the time, but one on the corner where there was this huge neighborhood playground and basketball court. Right behind the playground, there was this field. It wasn't huge, but it was decently sized, and then there were woods behind it. I went out into the field one last time before we left the house for good. I was wearing this corny pink t-shirt from, Walmart that said something about boys being losers, don't hate lol. I was 12, skinny jeans, and these weird light-up shoes. As I was walking further into it, I saw it. There was someone who had my exact facial features, wearing my exact outfit, same hairstyle, same birthmark, same everything. I just stared at it in disbelief because I assumed I was just seeing things, but then it started moving. She walked up to me and paused for a moment before saying, "Don't leave." I stopped there, frozen for a while, and then she started shaking her head no before just turning around and walking away. I haven't seen anything like it since, and any time I tell someone about it, they immediately assume I'm lying. I wasn't tired when this happened. I, obviously, wasn't high or drunk, I just saw it. It wasn't like a brief reflection I could have seen in a body of water. We were standing around trees and dirt. It creeps me out to think about it, and I still don't know what it could mean. I've thought that maybe it's connected to these 2 kids in my neighborhood who always told me they could see and talk to ghosts, and when I asked them to prove it, they started listing my dead family members. I would have been 7 at the time, and they were 8 and 10. Neither of them knew my last name, their parents didn't know my name to begin with. I would just see them at the park, and that happened. They told me how they died, and I later confirmed with family members that, in fact, was how they died. I don't know how these 2 instances could be connected, but I feel like they somehow are. This is a story that I only recently remembered again in a conversation with my fiancée. When I remembered the story, I was overwhelmed by an uncomfortable feeling, similar to what it was like at that moment. I never fully managed to figure out what really happened then, so I decided to share that story here. My older sister had graduated from med school at the time, and my parents decided to organize a celebration for our family and friends on the occasion of that event. The celebration was held at the cottage of our family friends, where we grew up, so I was very familiar with the space. Imagine a large empty clearing, a large square surrounded by houses and fields between them. A narrow road leading to individual houses runs along the perimeter itself, and at that time, it was not even fully paved. It was mostly a dirt road. From that main road, which framed the houses in a square, you could go down into the dense forest that surrounded that square. The depth of the forest was great, and when you turned off the main road towards the path, you had to walk for a long time to reach the river, which was a few kilometers away. All this was familiar to me because I grew up there and spent a good part of my childhood playing in those woods. I was afraid of the forest, but nothing more than normal, and I was always careful not to stray from the path so as not to get lost. My parents organized a celebration and invited a large number of people, including my cousin P. She and I were close in age, and we got along well. As the number of people became tiring for us, we decided to take a walk so we could catch up on life, just the two of us. We were both about 20 years old then, and I led her down the road because I knew the path I wanted us to take. Down the perimeter, alongside the forest, next to all the other houses so as not to be alone. Everything was normal until we reached one of the turns for the forest that I mentioned. Somehow we both stopped without saying a word and looked in silence at the path that stretched deep into the forest. "Let's go inside." I spoke first, which is unusual for me. As I previously mentioned, I've always harbored a slight fear of the forest, particularly after an incident in which I became lost. That was when I was still a child, but they managed to find me quickly after my screams rang throughout the area. For this reason, I never left the road without my older friend A, who carried a stick with him and his hunting dog, May. But now something was different. "Let's go in there. It won't hurt us," I said to my cousin and stepped inside. "I don't want to, I'm scared," answered my cousin, but I persistently assured her that everything was fine. Ultimately, she followed me despite being 30 steps behind. This is not a good idea. Let's go back," P tried to convince me once again, but I walked forward as if in a trance. "Everything is fine," I repeated to her. After some time, when we were already deep into the forest, I finally stopped myself. I could not take a step more. I was paralyzed. It was as if a part of me tried to break away from whatever was pulling me inside. I was overcome with fear, my heart was pounding hard, and my breath stopped. It was as if all sounds had stopped. It was daytime, but there was no sign of life, not a bird, not a rabbit, not a butterfly. Only silence and those trees that I could feel would stretch out their branches and trap me forever in this forest. P was a few steps behind me. "I'm going back. I can't do this," said P and ran the same way we came. Her voice was trembling, and I could feel the panic in it. After another moment, I managed to break away and run after her. We ran without looking back, as if something was chasing us, until we reached the entrance of the place from which we entered. A little further towards the cottage, we finally stopped as we finally felt safe. We did not look back out of pure fear. We tried to catch our breath, and only then did we talk as we were walking back home, fast and still scared. There was something there, we were sure of that. I wasn't afraid at first when I went inside. In fact, it was as if something was calling me, wanting me to follow it, but my cousin's frightened voice and presence tore me out of the trance. It had called me. I'm afraid to think what would have happened if I was alone, if there wasn't someone to pull me back so I wouldn't go too far. I didn't know where I was going, I just knew when we got to that road that I had to go inside. It scares me, and I can't shake the fear that overwhelmed me and my cousin after that event. Any thoughts on what happened here? Why did I go inside and persuade my cousin to follow me? What caused her to bring me back to reality, and why were we both so frightened? There was no sound, there was no voice, there was nothing. Just the unspoken words of something that I heard and my cousin didn't. Back when I was 11 years old, I and my brother, who we'll call Greg, loved going to a part of a creek about 1/8 of a mile from our house. We would always bike there and spend the day making wooden knives, campfires, skipping stones, and basically everything a typical kid would do. This part of the creek was particularly dark and creepy, which made it even more fun. We had just gotten back from a walk in the upper part of the creek, and we had just started packing up our belongings, when Greg told me to shut up and act natural. I did as he said, figuring it was some kind of joke. But he looked panicked and a little scared, so I asked him why he was telling me to do this, and he whispered to me that there was a man standing behind us, about 60 feet away, just staring. Greg had his spy look behind sunglasses, which were glasses that had mirrors on the inside of them, which he had brought for two reasons: for the fun of telling me what I was doing by looking at me with them, and for the sunlight, which always bothered him. But that's how he spotted the man, with those glasses. We had two options: wait for the man to leave or run if he came closer. The man never did leave, and he never came closer, but he did kneel in front of a tree stump, and he laid his head down on it, with his hands on his head, which gave me and Greg the perfect chance to sneak to a nearby tunnel, which had us completely hidden from the man's sight. As the minutes passed, the man remained in the same position with his head down on the tree stump, but he began muttering to himself. Then he started yelling, then full-on screaming, and shaking his head and tearing at his hair while doing it. I and Greg were trembling, with our little Swiss Army knives open to make us feel braver. Eventually, we watched the man look around, possibly scanning the area for any trace of us, and then he slowly left, and we started quietly crawling out of the small tunnel. We crept to the road with all of our stuff and looked both ways. The man was gone, which leaves me and Greg confused to this day, years later, because he had absolutely nowhere to go or hide, unless he had headed back into the woods, in which case, we would have heard and or seen him. I also wonder what was wrong with him, why he was staring at us, and what he could have / would have done to us. But the part that troubles me the most is the fact that he could still be out there somewhere. But one thing is for sure, I and Greg never went to that part of the creek ever again. I believe I followed one of the creatures into the woods. The other night around midnight, my mother-in-law, who lives on the opposite end of an adjoined 1-acre plot of land as my wife and I, called my wife, telling her she was hearing a loud wailing sound out back of their house past the tree line. We live in the mountains at the base of a forest. My wife got my attention and told me to come to the window, where we listened for about 10 minutes. There was a very loud feminine wailing coming from the woods. It was something like the sound a fox or a coyote makes, but each wail was much longer, louder, and more human. I have since looked up every wild animal in my area and have yet to match the sound I heard to one of them. Right around the time I thought to record the sound, it stopped. I've listened to the recording a few times to see if maybe I caught a glimpse of the sounds it was making, but I don't think I caught it. In the recording, though, my mother-in-law talks about how when she first heard the sound, she turned the back porch light on and walked outside. She has 2 German shepherds that will bark at just about anything and spend the majority of their time outside lying in the yard. Neither of them made a sound, nor did either of them want to go outside with her. She said she went outside and clapped her hands to try and scare it away. After a little bit, she saw what she said was a small gray cat, looking to be about domestic size. It walked up to the far side of the creek that separates the backyard from the woods but didn't move any closer and then proceeded to go back up the hill into the woods. She said it felt like it was trying to lead her somewhere. She, being an animal lover like my wife, said she was worried that there was an animal trapped or hurt, and like some video from the dodo, she was going to go into the woods and find some helpless animal to nurse back to health. Being of sound mind, she called us to express her fear of going out there by herself and asked if I would be willing to bring a gun for our protection in case we encountered a coyote or something else once we arrived. At the sound of gun and woods and afraid, I was all ears. I grabbed my plate carrier, a couple of knives, my pistol, shotgun, my Milwaukee chest-mounted bar light, and a small hand torch. My mother-in-law met my wife and me in our backyard, and I told them to drive up the side road and see if they could position the car to shine a light into the woods. I said I'd go to the back of their property and into the woods to avoid waking my father-in-law or the dogs. I made my way over and approached the woods from the right side of the property. Just so you understand, the left side of the property is flanked by a long fence that stretches about 2 acres in length, going back deep into the woods, separating our property from our neighbors. A small road flanks the property on the right side, leading to a few additional houses situated far behind ours. I walked over a small bridge that covers the stream separating the backyard from the woods and walked diagonally toward the fence line. As soon as I stepped foot into the woods, I spotted something reflective just in front of the fence. I had yet to pull out any lights, so I turned on my hand torch and aimed it at the reflection. I walked a bit closer, and the light didn't move, so I imagined it was just a bit of the fence catching the light. Once I was about 20 paces away from it, I saw that there was a small gray blob, roughly ovular in shape and covered in fur. My first and only thought was raccoon because in that split second it added up. I then panned my flashlight to the right about 10 feet away, and it landed on a set of eyes. What I had seen before was just this raccoon, but what I saw after that was something else. This thing was a little bigger than a coyote. It had gray fur, and honestly, I can't recall if it had a tail or ears or anything else. It was both canine and feline in characteristics, leaning more toward canine in appearance. It stared into the light at me for a few moments and then started walking slowly deeper into the woods. As far as I know, coyotes and foxes alike would be out of there as soon as they smelled me or heard me take one step into the woods. Stranger still, this thing was not 10 feet away from this raccoon, and they seemed to be perfectly content. I swept the light back to the raccoon as it moved behind a large pile of rocks toward the fence. I thought it must have a burrow or something. I panned back toward the creature, and it had moved very far, deeper into the woods. I can't recall seeing it actually move. I can't recall seeing its rear end. I just looked up into the woods toward a crest at the top of the hill and saw its eyes staring at me again. I'm not one to just waltz through the woods in the middle of the night. In fact, if I was asked to just go into the woods at night, armed the way I was, I probably would have been freaked out even if there wasn't anything out there. But strangely, I was completely calm. As soon as I met its gaze, I turned on my chest-mounted floodlight and started making my way towards it. I walked probably about 100 feet deeper into the woods. It still hadn't moved. I kept walking until I saw my neighbor's house. The stretch of woods between their house and the fence narrowed out between the two where a hill sat. The creature had been at the top of the hill, just barely over the crest, when I heard crunching far off behind me at the base of the woods. It was my wife and mother-in-law. I looked back and saw their flashlights. When I turned back to look for the eyes again, they had disappeared beyond the crest of the hill. I kept walking until I had a realization that I must have passed our property line. I pulled out my phone, called my wife, and asked her where our property line ended. She told me there's a line of small red flags from where we installed our electric fence last summer. I looked all around and couldn't see any. Keeping my eyes toward the hill, I started walking backwards toward our property. I had walked back about 100 feet before I saw the line of small flags. Once there, I turned and made my way back down the hill. I met them at the base of the woods and showed them where I had seen the two animals. We made our way back down the yard and just barely made it into the back porch when another wail was let out. This time it was different. It was similar, but it was a deeper pitch. It had come from the direction of the creature I followed. From the moment I pressed record to the moment I left the woods, not a single sound was made. It was completely silent. That whole time I felt no fear, just an urge to follow it. It was just pure curiosity. Now when I think back on it, it makes me nauseous. Listening to the recording from the other night makes me nauseous too. I'm not sure what to think. Maybe you guys can help shed some light. Unknown being encountered with lost time. Mississippi. It all started when a friend and I were playing with flashlights and putting them in the air. We were shining it at random trees, in the sky, etc. We started noticing what looked like stars, but they were moving. Almost pulsing. We ignored it. We again did the same thing the next night, and this is when it got creepy. We noticed a huge, triangular-shaped drone coming from the church near our location. It was triangular-shaped and dark, with 3 white lights at each corner and a light in the middle that turned red later on, no wings, and no sound. The object hovered briefly before making an unusual sideways turn and disappearing. Then the next time we encountered this object, it was flying directly over the treetops. From a distance, the object resembled a plane but was silent until it flew directly above us, at which point we heard a low hum. We only realized it was above us when we looked up in response to the noise. We caught it on video, which you may still have. As soon as we shined our light over it, it flashed its red light and disappeared. Seconds later an F-16 fighter jet was following its path directly above us but didn't seem to find it since we saw it again later. That same night, around 4 a.m., I got stuck in a trance. I sat outside, freezing cold, and couldn't move. I held an unlit cigarette in my hand for what felt like 5 minutes, but when I went inside, I realized it had actually been 5 hours. I saw a figure/being, tan and almost vibrating, and it seemed like it was fast. It blended with the trees at first, but it was different. It moved and ran towards the woods, but when I say ran, I mean it was almost like moving at a rate so fast it reminded me of a slow motion effect. I later told my friend about that, and he had seen it once before too. Also on those nights, we could hear something landing on our roof with a loud thump and would then hear feet shuffling outside. Our dog would freak out, and one of those nights literally ripped herself free of a wire cable that she forcefully pulled herself from. She was so strong and wild she broke it in half. We could also hear the next neighbor's animals doing the same barking thing as well. There was always an eerie feeling when this would happen, and you could feel a change in the air. It felt very sinister, and to this day, I can still see it all in my head. Okay, so this story is scary, or at least it was to me. It happened about 2 years ago. I used to live in the middle of nowhere, Kentucky. It was pretty rural and didn't have much around apart from a general store down the road and a gas station. Probably not even more than 300 people lived in the small town. Everyone knew each other, so there wasn't really much to worry about among the townspeople. One day I was sitting on my porch, and I turned behind me because I felt watched, and right there standing was this humanoid creature, except it had scales that didn't look like fur, like Bigfoot or a bear. Immediately I looked at it, I was scared, and I ran inside and grabbed my gun. As soon as I walked outside, I pointed my gun at where the noises were coming from. Instantly I heard rustling. It was fading off in the distance, and probably 100 meters or so into the woods from our house is a highway. That goes off on the interstate, and it's the only way in and out of the town, and we're looking, and we're like, maybe it was just a trespasser, and then again, I was never really sure, but lo and behold, about 2 weeks later same thing happened, sitting there saying porch swing on my phone, look at my side, and this time it's not behind, it's standing at our pond drinking. I'm still staring at it because I guess it hasn't noticed me. Jams hand through the ice. It is the middle of winter, but jams its hand through the ice on the top of this pond and grabs one of our fish, and I was sitting here thinking, like, how did it grab our fish? But to me, in the moment, that question really didn't matter because I was more concerned about killing this thing, whatever it might have been. The one thing you need to know about humans is our eyes reflect red light, dogs and cats reflect green light. However, with humans, the red light you have to have a camera to spot it, and it didn't show up whenever I took a picture of this thing. Its eyes were green reflective, but the picture was completely corrupted. Like the file completely corrupted, it didn't show up after I took the picture that I was able to look at, but then as soon as I just left the app, it completely shut down, and I couldn't go back to my camera roll for like an hour, and then once I finally could, the picture was gone, and so I'm thinking this is not normal because what kind of creature, whenever you take a photo of it, it doesn't show up on the camera, not to mention when I looked at it, it was green, like the eyes of this thing weren't human. This thing was a creature that was nocturnal at that because their eyes are green and he can see in the dark. They are nocturnal predators no matter what this thing might have been. We put up barbed wire around the entire 40 acres that we owned, and we haven't seen the thing since we did that, but we did have one more creepy incident, and that was the fact that our dog, who is an Australian Shepherd Blue Heeler mix, ran down into the woods, just wanted to let him out. He usually just goes and uses the restroom and comes right back, but he ran down into the woods, and I was like, where is he going? So I, Grandma, went to follow him, and then when I looked, he was already halfway across the field. I was like, this isn't normal, so I called out to him, and he stops, looks back at me, and he's growling at something. Whatever he is growling at is up to no good, and hurry. I was able to recall my dog, and we're sitting there looking, and he is looking in one direction the entire time, hearing into the woods. I'm sitting out like, what is out there? I called my best friends, and they brought their hunting rifles. Now, their guns are hunting rifles like mine was. They use their guns primarily for home defense. Semi-automatic rounds. If you need anything else around the time I get that, I will be extremely surprised. Nonetheless, the dog is still on edge, and they're like, what? What are you looking at? And I'm like, I don't know. One of them pulls out a thermal scope-ish thing. It was like a spotting scope, and we're looking under the word. He's looking at the scope, and he's peering around the stops. He's looking. He's like, do things ducking huge? Like, what was huge? He said, there is a creature out there. Right there, I like where we can't see it, he points out, and we're looking. We can't see when we look at the Spanx, we can see it. This creature appeared as bright as daylight in the midst of winter. We're looking at it, and we look at each other. We glance back, only to find it gone. I'm uncertain about how to interpret this experience, and to be honest, I won't be venturing into the woods anytime soon. This happened to me when I was 9 years old. My younger brother was sick, and so I was spending a lot of time with my grandparents, who lived between Duncannon and Newport, Pennsylvania. They had a 10-acre property, and my grandmother had gardens and flower gardens and fruit trees, and I played outside a lot. But I was always giving boundaries. One boundary that my grandmother emphasized was not to go beyond the line of pine trees located above her flower garden. I had been back there with my mother and with other adults because my uncle lived on the other side of that lot of woods, so I'd walk through there quite a bit. And it was just a big hill. But I was always warned by my grandmother never to go there alone or even just with other kids. I had to have an adult. On this particular day my grandmother was inside making bread, and she would come out and check on me, but I was on my own best behavior. And I heard music, which I had no idea where that could be coming from. The hill was all covered with mostly pine trees, and it was a good 40-minute walk to my uncle's house, so I know the music wasn't coming from there. So I took a chance, and I walked between the pines. Now they were planted in rows of 3, so I kind of had to weave between them. When I got to the other side, I could see up on this hill the trees were all gone, and there were carnival tents, almost like a circus, and there was a long path leading up, and at the bottom of the path was a woman in a white dress. And I don't remember her face, but her hand, which was reaching out to me, had all these sparkly rings, and she was calling me by name. I could smell popcorn, I could hear chattering voices. So I went with her. I took her hand, and she led me up this path, and she's talking to me about the music and the animals and the people. When we finally got up there, I wanted to go ride the Ferris wheel because I could see it, but it never stopped. As I'm watching it, it never stops to leave people on or off. And she says you're not ready for that. Instead she takes me down to a green and white striped tent that is the freak show. Now as we're walking, I notice that the people passing us have blurred faces. I can't make them out. And I'm starting to get just a little bit frightened by this, but her voice is very calming, and so I can continue to walk with her. When we get into the freak show, everything's very clear. There's a dog-faced boy, there's a bearded lady, there's a little girl younger than me whose eyes twinkle like stars, there's a man who can bend himself all up and he's super thin, there's a man who's heavier but he has 4 arms, and then there's this woman at the very end who appears to be melting. She would melt down till it was just her head, and then it would look like something was pulling her back up, and she would be fully formed again in this gray dress. And as I'm hanging out in this area with them, the lady in white goes and she gets me popcorn and cotton candy and soda and a soft pretzel, and this was stuff I didn't get most of the time, so I was all happy, and I'm eating and drinking my soda and just enjoying myself. And the melting woman takes something out of her pocket and hands it to me, and it's this little silver ring, just plain, not decorated or anything, and she says, "Hold on to this. When the lady asks you if you want to stay, tell her you need to go home." And I'm having such a good time that I really don't want to leave, but at some point the woman does ask me, "Don't you want to stay with us? Wouldn't you like to live here?" And I say, "No, I want to go home." She looks really disappointed, and she asks me again and again. I say I want to go home. Eventually, she takes me out of the freak show and back to the path and down the hill, and again I notice all the blurred faces. But even the posters on the sides of these tents are blurry, and I can't make out what they say, and in my hand I've got this little silver ring. So we stopped at the bottom of the path, and I could hear my grandmother calling my name. I have no idea how long I've been gone, but it's dark, and it had been sunny and beautiful when I left, so I thought, oh, it's night, and I've been gone for hours. When I pull away from this woman, she says, "You will come back in a week right here. If you want to return, I will take you back to the carnival, but you cannot leave after that." And I'm running to the trees and running through, and I'm hearing it, but I'm not really paying attention. I get through the trees, and there's my grandmother. And she's so mad, and she's yelling at me that she told me never to go through the trees without an adult. So I start telling her about the carnival and the lady in white, and she grabs me and shakes me. And then my dad appears, and he just hugs me and is crying. I have never seen my dad cry before. So I started telling him, and my grandmother stops me and says apparently I fell asleep in the woods and I had a dream. My absence lasted nearly 2 days. "Did you get me back to the house?" I still had my hand clenched tight, and my grandmother asked me about it, so I open my hand, and there's this little silver ring. Which she takes, and she tells me never again might I go through those trees. And if I hear my name being called or I see this woman again, I need to run back to the house. And she kept that ring until her death, and at that point I got it back from my grandfather, and I had it cut and the edges beveled, and I wear it in my ear. My grandmother never explained to me why she was so upset about it, and when I told my mother what had happened, she said we could never talk about it. But after my grandmother's death, I was going through some of the photo albums, and there's a picture of her in Maryland outside of church with the woman in a long white dress. So take the picture to my grandfather, and I say, "This is the woman." And he looked like he was going to faint. He told me that the woman in the picture was my grandmother's mother. I started asking questions about her, but he refused to answer them. Even after all these years, I still feel somewhat unsettled about the entire situation. I still wear this little silver ring in my ear. Some kind of encounter. I'm not sure if this is a skinwalker or spirit. I live in Southern California. About a week ago I was staying at my boyfriend's house. He lives with his mom and stepdad, but they were gone on vacation, and we were watching the 3 dogs. The first night everything was fine. Dogs slept well in the master bedroom while we were down the hall in my boyfriend's bedroom. The second night, we crawled in bed around 9 to watch a movie, and the dogs were restless and kept barking and growling in the kitchen. I had to get up multiple times to tell them to stop and go to bed. 10:30 p.m. I was about to fall asleep when I got a call from my sister, who drove out to the desert, Ocotillo, to camp with her boyfriend. She was panicking. She said while they were unpacking their stuff, they heard some kind of cackling. Almost like laughter but not totally human sounding. Followed by a very deep, almost fake sounding howl. She said it was similar to hyena laughter but deep. There are no hyenas in San Diego County. Coyotes, maybe, but that's pretty recognizable. She asked her BF if he heard the howl, and he said yes. They estimated it was within 200 feet of them. Both of them got so freaked out knowing it wasn't a coyote, they packed their shit and got in the truck. Driving away, they were looking around with a flashlight and saw nothing. No other campsites. No people anywhere near them. No coyotes. I calmed her down on the phone, and they ended up moving to a different area closer to a ranger station and other people. I immediately thought Skinwalker because I have read stories about them before, but I didn't want to put that in her head in that moment. I ended up going back to sleep. About 2 hours later I woke up to one of the dogs whining and scratching at our bedroom door. I start to get out of bed, and I hear what sounded like a car alarm. Just like a horn going off. I looked out the window, and it wasn't our car, so I opened the door to let the dog in, and the sound got louder. I realized it was coming from somewhere in the house. I woke up my boyfriend, and we both walked down the hallway and saw all the dogs standing outside the master bedroom. We walked inside and realized it was his mom's alarm clock going off at 12:33 a.m. We were trying to figure out how to turn it off, but none of the buttons were working. We pressed every single one until he finally unplugged it and it shut off. I told him how creepy it was that the alarm would just go off out of nowhere. He thought maybe his mom accidentally set the alarm clock before she left and didn't realize it was 4 a.m. instead of p.m. I thought about it for a second but then realized that this is the type of alarm clock that you usually set the night before, and we had been there by ourselves for 2 nights already, and it hadn't gone off. If his mom had set it, she would have done it the previous night, not 2 days later. He kind of just brushed it off as it glitching, and we turned and went to go head back to bed. We told the dog to go to bed, but they were still standing outside the door. None of them wanted to come in and lie on their beds. We ended up going back to our room, and they all followed us and laid down on the floor. I told my BF how I was freaked out about the dogs being antsy and then getting that call from my sister and then the alarm clock going off and the dogs following us back into his bedroom instead of going back to sleep on their beds in the master. He said, yeah, it was weird, but it's fine. Which didn't make me feel any better. The only thing that kept going through my mind was there is something in the house. I can feel it. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning I called my sister and told her what happened, and she said, I had that same feeling all night. That something was near us, and she could just feel it. She said that she doesn't think it was a coincidence. Something was ducking with her, and because she told me about it, it came and ducked with me. I believe that too. I also believe that something was luring us out of the room with the alarm clock, and the dogs knew. That's why they followed us back into the room and stayed with us the rest of the night. I don't know if it was for sure a skinwalker, but we were both in an area that has multiple Native American reservations close by. Whatever it was trying to scare us, and it worked. I was out camping with my uncle once. He's 10 years older than me. We're out in East Texas, somewhere well outside of Tyler to the west. It was a cold-as April night. We had planned to go fishing at the lake the next morning since it was too cold to do it at night. We're sitting around a campfire we made, and we're discussing shit, kind of jaded from our lives at the moment. It's all really pretty boring, so we're starting to get tired. At this point it's like 3 a.m. Our camp was set up off a half-mile long dirt road that's really just a side loop of another bigger dirt road, so there are no cars coming up and down this shit, as the sheds were mostly abandoned. Well, at that lovely hour of 3 a.m., we're starting to doze off, and we hear a rumble, and headlights appear in the distance. The moment this occurred, my uncle and I just kind of turned towards it and stared, unsure of what to think, really. We were damn tired. The vehicle approaches at a moderate 15 to 20 miles per hour speed, and the headlights are aimed right at us the way we were situated on the road. I sit up straight, and I'm hella confused at who this is. When it comes really close, it's a white van, like the kind electricians and plumbers buy. As it approaches us, it slows down and stops about 30 to 40 feet away, kind of in the middle of the road, headlights aimed right at us. Since our fire was really low at this hour, it was naturally dark around us, so we couldn't see past the headlights who the duck was in this van. We're sitting up, we haven't said shit, and this van is parked idle in front of us an awkward distance away. I start to get a little anxious because it really dawned on me that we're way the duck out here, like 2 miles from town. This could be some country psycho. My uncle's like 27, he's not budging yet, either. Finally, after like 15 seconds, Uncle yells out a "Hey, what's up?" And nothing happens. I was hoping someone would turn it off and exit the van and say, "Hey, we're having some mechanical issues," or some shit like that, but the ducking van is just sitting there, and we're getting blinded by the headlights. So, like 5 minutes later, this ducking van is still there and parked. I have no ducking clue why we weren't moving, so my uncle says nervously, "Alright, let's just ducking go and ask this guy what the hell is up." We both get up, and the ducker shifts into reverse and backs up slowly as he or she notices us walking its way. "Da duck, homie? I'm here shitting my pants, there's probably some inbred in there jacking off or something, and my uncle's telling me to just come on and see what this guy needs." We're walking at him, and the van is just backing up, and my uncle just gives up and turns around. He's trying to appear confident in his movements to the driver of the van, but he's scared as duck, like me as well. Nervously he tells me, "Let's just go back to our site, I don't know what's going on here." We go into our tent ready to go to sleep. Maybe this guy will leave? And like a minute later, we hear that goddamn van creeping up at us again. I was about to lose it. What in the duck was going on? My uncle gets out of the tent and yells, "Hey, do you need help or something?" I thought maybe we were on his property or something, but my uncle said this was where his family friends owned some land, so know what the hell was going on. They often had get-togethers for family fishing competitions. After all, why the shit would he go down this loop? So this van is outside of our campsite again, headlights still shining right the duck on us. Nothing happened yet again as a response to my uncle's call. Uncle comes back into the tent and says, "Alright, still no ducking clue what's happening. Let's just chill in here and listen for a door to open." We lay down, and I'm over here losing it silently. The engine goes off. I shit myself. My uncle's lying next to me, silent. I anxiously whisper to him, "What the hell are we going to do?" And he whispers back to just stay quiet and listen for a door. Well, after, like, an hour, we hear no door, just crickets. At some point I fell asleep, and I assume my uncle did too. No idea how I fell asleep, honestly. But when I woke up to an alarm clock, Uncle was already up outside the tent, and I came out, and ducking shit, the van left. This happened to me about 5 years ago. I was 19, young and stupid, I suppose. I was getting ready to go see my boyfriend at the time. He lived a good 3 hours away. We had talked about seeing each other on the weekend like we always did. I decided I would drive to him since he always drove to me, so I was in my car getting ready for the long drive ahead. I forgot my TomTom, GPS. It was back when phones didn't have them yet. So I figured, hell, I'll turn around and get it. I wasn't far from my house. Fast forward, I was driving about 2 hours in, and then I noticed I didn't have cell service where I was thought, whatever, this is Tennessee. I shrugged it off. I was on a highway in the middle of nowhere. My boyfriend at the time did live in the isolated part of his town. Fast forward, my GPS told me to take a right in the next 5.6 miles. I thought, okay, this is weird, so I turned onto the road. I was about 56 minutes from his place, my GPS said, so I didn't think I was lost. Now, this road I drove onto was dark. I drove for about 10 minutes before I started noticing that my cell phone still didn't have service. I pulled over and tried to call my boyfriend to confirm whether I was on the correct road, but the call failed. I got annoyed, so I left it at that and figured I should get service soon. Then suddenly the road I was on started to become narrow and creepy looking. Despite the fact that it was a dirt road, I didn't consider myself lost. I've never even driven to his place before, so when I got up the road, I saw what looked like an old bridge. I thought, seriously, this can't be right. I put my car in park. The road was dark, so I assumed that no one would come down it. Since there were no houses nearby, I decided to call my boyfriend. Finally, I had service, well, 1 bar, just enough, I guess. He answered. He said, "Where are you? I've been calling you for 5 hours?" I thought, what, 5 hours? No, it's only been 2 hours, he asked once more. Where am I? Am I lost? I told him what road my GPS told me to gone, and then my phone started going out of signal, call dropped. I thought, duck, you have got to be kidding me. I put my phone down, looking around at my surroundings. I noticed something over at the abandoned bridge about 3 miles away from me. It had a reddish glow, which looked like an eye. I thought, WTF? Getting scared, I looked for my phone, my GPS went off. You have reached your destination. I jumped, and my car's engine light came on. Note that my car had never done this. I started hearing something near the woods that sounded like screaming. I became so frightened that I instinctively put my car into reverse without thinking. I had this feeling in my stomach. It was not a favorable one. My gut was screaming at me to flee immediately. I turned my car around and got back onto the highway, which took 20 minutes. I stopped at a gas station for directions. I checked my car, the engine light went off. I thought, thank God, in calming relief. I checked my phone and had 4 bars, called my BF, and told him everything that had happened. I was so freaked out I didn't even go to his place that night. I got home, it was 4 a.m. now. I don't know what I encountered on that road that night, but I'll never drive at night anymore, and I will not go on that road as long as I live, I swear to it. Something in the woods. I live in a neighborhood that has a golf course in it. It's a nice place. It was redone just 2 years ago after having been in complete disrepair for about 3 years. One clear night, my girlfriend and I decided it would be cool to lie out and view/take some pics of the stars. We figured the golf course would be a decently clear place with an unobstructed view. We went out just a little ways away from the big neighborhood clubhouse, so we weren't deep in the middle of nowhere. After finding a little nook in a hillside, we set up camp. On the edge of the golf course, there's a strip of woods probably 30 or so feet deep separating the green from the bordering houses. There's not much wooded area for anything to be in, and no reason for my encounter. Now that you, hopefully, have an image of where we were, let's begin. We were just relaxing, talking at a normal volume. It wasn't that late, maybe 9, so we didn't worry about waking anybody up. I was taking pictures and having fun like normal. We heard rustling in the leaves across the green and thought it was a squirrel. We continued on but got a little freaked out when the noises began to concentrate pretty much right across from us. I froze, waiting for something to move. It didn't, and we went back to relaxing. I'm not sure why I thought that meant we were safe, but when the noises resumed a minute or two later, I realized that it was silent because whatever it was hadn't been moving. This is when I really began to get scared. It was just dark enough and just far enough away to where I couldn't make anything out in the darkness. The footsteps we heard were loud. They broke twigs, rustled leaves, and generally seemed to belong to a human-sized something. I froze once again, listening to whatever this was roam around intermittently right across from us. I was far too scared to shine a light or shout out to it. In hindsight, I should have turned my camera towards the area and taken a long exposure pic to see what it was, although I'm glad I didn't. After sitting paralyzed for what felt like a year waiting for it to go away or reveal itself, it didn't. We quickly packed up the blanket and my camera equipment and hoofed it out of there, not looking back. Throughout the whole experience, I had an intense feeling of being watched. I believe in things like what this channel usually features, and my girlfriend has had previous experiences with creepy, possession type stuff. Whether you believe in any of those things or not, something was there moving around. It felt like it was shuffling around right at the edge of my vision. We have deer in the neighborhood, but their pattern of movement was unlike any I had heard from them. It sounded distinctly like a bipedal creature of some variety. There was absolutely no reason a person would have been there, and I believe they would have either revealed themselves somehow or moved in a different manner if that's what it was. I don't know. I apologize for rambling on, but I wanted to get all the details out in the hope that someone can perhaps shine some light on this story or share a similar experience. It was a deeply unnerving experience, and I'm pleased to find a place to share it. I think someone was following me through the woods in Ireland. Back when I was 14 years old, my family had moved from our home in England to the Republic of Ireland, where we lived for a further 6 years. We had first moved to the northwest of the country, but after a year of living there, we then relocated to the Irish Midlands, as my dad had gotten a new job working in Dublin. My parents had bought a cottage on the outskirts of a tiny village that was a stopping point from one of the larger towns to the next. This village was so small and remote, there was basically nothing to do. But not long after moving here and taking to exploring the surrounding area with my border collie, Maisie, I eventually found a large stretch of bogland containing a man-made forest. Every weekend or half-term away from school, I took to walking this area with my dog, in which I would follow along a railway line used for transporting peat. However, after months of trekking this very same bogland, I eventually stopped going there. I can't quite recall the reason why, but maybe it was because I always felt as though I was trespassing, which I wasn't, or because the bogland was so bumpy and uneven, I always came home with horrific blisters. Although I stopped going to this bogland to walk my dog, outside one of the nearby towns where I went to school, there was a public forest. Because this forest was a 20-minute drive away, my dad would take me and Maisie there, drop us off, and then pick us up again 2 or 3 hours later. What I loved about these woods was that it was always quiet, only with the occasional family, dog walker, or jogger passing us by. On one particular evening, I had gone back to these woods with Maisie, where my dad would later pick us up after running some errands. As we made our way along the trail, the evening had already started to dim. Wanting to make my way back to the car park before it got too dark, I decided to take a shortcut through the forest via one of the many narrow side trails. Following down one of these side trails, I and Maisie stumbled upon a small teepee-shaped hut made from logs. Loving a satisfying game of hide and seek, I would sometimes hide inside this teepee when Maisie wasn't looking, where she would spend the next couple of minutes circling round the hut trying to find me, not realizing she could just go inside. Whether I played this game with Maisie that day, I'm not sure, but following down this exact same side trail, I turned to look behind me. Staring down the entryway, I then see a man walking 20 meters behind, having just taken this side trail. For some unknown reason, I had a strange instant feeling about this man, even though I had only just noticed him. I can't remember or even describe the way this man was walking, but the way he did so felt suspicious to me. Listening to my instincts, or perhaps just my paranoia, I quickly latched my lead back onto Maisie and hurriedly make my way down the trail. A few minutes later, although I had reached back onto the main trail, the evening had already turned much darker. When I turned again to check if the man was behind me, I could still see him around the curve, now only 10 meters away. I did try to tell myself I was just being paranoid, and this man was most likely not following me, but my gut instinct still told me something was off. Thinking ahead, I pulled out my phone to call my dad to make sure he was already in the car park waiting for me, but there was no answer. Because there was no answer, I just assumed he was probably still driving, and because he was still driving, I just hoped my dad was nearly on his way. By the time I returned to the car park, it was nearly dark, and the only car in the parking area was not my dad's. Sitting down by a picnic bench to wait for him to come and get us, all I could do was hope he would be coming soon and that this strange man from the woods was not following me after all. Only a minute or two later, I could hear the footsteps of this very same man approaching through the darkness. Anxiously anticipating him passing by, I try to distract myself on my phone, or at least make myself seem less approachable. Thankfully enough, the man just walks completely by me. Entering the car park, the man then gets in his vehicle, the only car in the car park. But he doesn't drive away. He just stays there, sitting inside his car with both the engine and headlights turned on. 20 minutes must have gone by, but my dad still wasn't here, and yet this very same stranger was. Trying to call and text my dad to say I was waiting for him, I was met with no answer. While I continued waiting, I tried to rationalize why this man hadn't decided to drive off. Whatever reasons I came up with, they were not very convincing for me, and for those whole 20, or however many more minutes, I sat outside those woods in complete darkness, hearing nothing but the hum of this stranger's engine among the silent night air. What made this situation even more anxiety-inducing was that my dog Maisie had been endlessly whining by my feet, scraping dirt away beneath the bench to make a surprisingly deep hole. Maisie was in general a very nervous dog and basically whined at everything, but perhaps she too felt as though something about this situation wasn't right. Thankfully, the strange man finally reversed from his parking spot, exited the car park, and drove onto the main road after what felt like far longer than 20-odd minutes, leaving me and Maisie in peace. Even though we found ourselves alone, essentially stranded outside a dark forest, a profound sense of relief washed over me. My dad did eventually come and get us, 10 minutes after the man had finally decided to drive off. Do you want to know what my dad's excuse was as to why he was so late? He forgot he had to pick us up. I don't know if that man really was following me through the forest, and I definitely don't know why he just sat in his car for 20 minutes. But if I had to learn anything from that experience, it would be the following. 1. My dad can sometimes be a careless douche. And 2. Never hike through the forest alone late in the evening. I don't know what we heard that night. Okay, so this encounter took place almost 2 weeks ago. I would like to preface this to say that I attend a university in the mountains. One day I was with a friend, and we decided to go smoke at this spot on a hill that we knew about. I'll just say my friend's name was Gloria for the sake of privacy. So the hill we decided on had a trail, and it leads to the top of the hill that has an overlook onto the city and surrounding mountains. It's actually a really nice spot, and I had been to the overlook a handful of times. On the left side and back side of the hill, it is heavily wooded, and the trail snakes up the front of the hill up to the overlook. At one point in the trail, it splits off and goes into the woods on the side of the hill. There is a hut that I don't know who built in the woods that the trail leads to. The trail eventually leads down the hill to the road. But anyway, the hut/tent looks to be made of actual wood from the little forest it is in, and it is covered with tarps to guard against the rain. There are trash bags inside, you know, the usual smoker spot. We had been to the tent only one time before while the sun was setting, and we left with plenty of light. This time we decided to go when the sun had already set, so it was late dusk. We walked along the path and reached the forest, using our phone lights set to the highest brightness. As we reach the tent, I realize I have to pee, so I tell Gloria that I'll be right back and to not judge me. You see, the leaves had already fallen, and the ground was completely covered, so every time we took a step, it was loud and obnoxious. As I began to walk away from the tent, I kept hearing this strange noise in the distance that sounded like what I can now describe as the noise a bus makes whenever it stops and lets out the exhaust. Even though the noise was far, it was loud, and it echoed. At that time I did not know how to best describe the noise, so I paused and said, "Gloria, do you hear that? It sounds like someone is trying to start a car or something. I don't know." And she responded with, "No, I don't hear anything," so I just brushed it off and started walking again only to hear the noise happen multiple times. I got really creeped out and ran back into the tent, and my friend said she had heard it that time, and we were both creeped out. She had already unpacked a few of her things, and we just sat there about to start smoking. Then I realized that the noise only happened whenever I either made a sound, the leaves crunching, or had my phone light on. So, I told Gloria, "I think we only hear the noise when I turn my phone light on," and she said, "Okay, we'll turn it on, and let's see." I turned it on and pointed it out of the tent, and the noise immediately started, except it sounded much closer than before, and I turned my light off quickly. Gloria and I froze and just stared at each other, not knowing what to do. I whispered if we should leave, and she said yes. As she begins packing up, she is making all this noise, and the creepy noise begins again, and we hear it getting closer and closer, except this time we hear footsteps accompanying the sound. I was frozen in fear and had my eyes wide open, staring out of the opening of the tent to see if I could catch a glimpse of whatever was there, but I didn't see anything but the trees. By this time our eyes had adjusted to the dark, but there was still some, although a minuscule amount of light from the sunset. Finally Gloria finishes packing, and the only thing we hear are the footsteps. Thank God the horrible noise stopped, and they were getting closer and closer yet were much slower than before. At this point I could feel the fear radiating off of both of us, and I was hoping and praying that whatever this creature was could not sense fear because it was beyond evident at this point. Eventually we heard the steps go around the tent behind us very, very slowly. It was agonizing just sitting there. Meanwhile, I still had not peed. I felt helpless, and it felt like time was standing still. I remember sitting there and listening so hard to see if I could pick any other noise up, and I remember hearing some type of noise, but I just couldn't process what it was. Later, Gloria said she heard leaves falling onto the top of the tent, and I realized that is what I was hearing. There was no wind because the leaves on the ground would have been blowing around, and the leaves on the trees that I could see from the opening would have been moving as well, but they didn't. Finally, eventually everything just went quiet, and I don't know if it was out of delusion, but I thought I heard a few steps walk away. After sitting in silence for a few minutes, we got the courage to turn our phone lights on, and we sprinted the duck out of there. I would like to note that the steps sounded rather heavy, and it was only one pair. I did some research and found the noise I heard. Supposedly, the noise is made by deer who alert other deer when danger is present. I don't think it was a deer because A, the steps were much heavier than a deer's. B, the steps were by something with only 2 feet. C, deer do not come close to danger, especially if they are alone, which wouldn't make sense because we only heard one pair of steps, so why would a deer that is alone warn itself? This also leads back to my previous point because a deer that is alone won't come close to danger. Sorry for such a long one, but does anyone know what this could have been? My paranormal experience. First, I want to start by saying that this story is 100% truthful and was witnessed by many people that I'm good friends with, still to this day, who can also recount the same experience. I don't care if you believe me, but I had a very strange experience. I was around 11 years old at the time, and it was in 2012. To begin with, you must understand the background to this event. I am from England, UK, and live in a city called Bristol. If you are a UK primary school student, you often go on a camping trip in your final year, year 6, age 10 or 11. Now this camping trip is usually to a safe and secure location that is often used by many other primary schools. In my school's case, we went to PGL, Parents Get Lost, Swindon, which is around an hour or so coach journey away from my primary school at the time. Now this is a very secure and safe location, used by hundreds of schools, and my school has used it plenty of times. It's full of various activities such as abseiling, giant swings, den building, etc., and it's a great experience to stay in a room with all your mates from primary school and away from your parents, despite teacher supervision at all times. Now, One thing to note about the Swindon PGL site is that there is a main complex, which is brand new and home to the canteen and hundreds of school hotel rooms. However, our school was given a building to the side, which was an old converted farmhouse. The teachers loved this, however, as it could only fit one school inside, which was ours, so there was no noise from all the other noisy schools if you were staying in the main new area. Boys' rooms were on the ground floor, with girls' rooms above on the first. The farmhouse seemed slightly daunting to our 10-year-old selves, but we did not care, as we were happy to be on holiday and in our rooms with our friends. Each day you would be given a camp leader, essentially a PGL staff member, who would take you to these cool and exciting activities during the day, such as den building or kayaking. So on this day, we get into our groups we were put in beforehand, and I was with a few of my mates and a few people in my class with two of my teachers and, of course, the PGL staff member. We were then told what task we would be given today, and out of all the fun activities, we were given the nature trail. What a waste of time. Anyway, as the site is fairly small, all the activities are all relatively close to one another. For example, a thin stretch of woodland surrounds the inner center of the main field, which is shaped like a square. In the center of this field are various activities as well as the Swindon Town Football Club training facilities, which seem to share land with the PGL camp, presumably due to its secure and low-key nature that was constantly monitored too. Anyhow, we make our way to the nature trail, which was going to be completed around the square field through the woodland area. I remember all of us being really bored as we just wanted to do the fun activities my friends were doing, yet we were stuck on the nature trail. We headed down this fairly wooded area with a very large path down the middle, which easily fit the whole group of us, and of course, to our right through the trees, we could see glimpses of the fun activities in the center of the square field. Yet as we stared down this large wooded path, it was empty, with the only glimpse at the very far end being a large metal fence with barbed wire on top to ensure the boundaries were secure and no visitors could get into the PGL camp or the Swindon Town FC training facilities. We carry on down the path, stopping every so often for our PGL staff member to tell us some stupid fact. When suddenly a dog appears at the very far end of the trail. The dog begins to run around the trees surrounding us on either side and even comes very close to the group but does not touch us. All the girls go awe and delight of this dog. Yet it seems strange, despite being a normal-sized dog, it seemed to be able to go through the trees as if it was invisible. Furthermore, although the lighting was darker due to it being in a wooded area, visibility was still very good, but the dog seemed to be as if it was dark like a shadow. As the dog is still running around the group and everyone is in awe at this dog, the PGL staff member seems confused, as if the dog shouldn't be here. Remember, this is a secure location for a children's camp and training facilities for Swindon Town FC only. That is when, at the very bottom of the path, a figure of a man appeared maybe 50 meters from the group, and I still remember this in great detail. This man, just like the dog, was a dark black shadow. However, the man was dressed in full farmer's gear as if he was from the 1900s. Although he was a shadow, you could make out the outline of a farmer's cap, large boots/wellies, and a large trench coat. The whole group was fixated on him, and even the PGL staff member said, "What's he doing here? He shouldn't be here." Then, just like that, he puts his hands to his mouth as if he were whistling, but no sound came out. Then, just like that, both he and the dog vanished in plain sight. He disappeared right before our very eyes. I still remember me and two mates sprinting down the path to look for this man, thinking he may have just turned the corner and it was all our imaginations. To reiterate, this is a secure, enclosed area with a small forest, a large field to our right, and a fenced-off area on the other side, as there is a road outside the campsite. Anyhow, we turn the corner, and we find the den building activity with a few of my schoolmates who were on this activity. I remember asking my friend, "Did you see a man and his dog?" They replied, "No one has come this way." Everyone in my nature trail group witnessed this extraordinary experience. I have no idea what it was, but I presume it was the old farmer of the land's ghost, but I have no idea how the dog was also a ghost and disappeared on his whistle in front of all our eyes. All I can guess is that it was a ghost sighting. Yet I have never heard of any shadow sort of ghost sightings, and it was my only paranormal sort of experience. My dad has also seen a ghost, and I have heard of one or two other people who have also believed to see one. Yet none to what was compared to me and my mate's sighting. This happened around 2012 when we were all around 10 or 11. But the PGL staff member and my two teachers also saw it and are confused. I just came to this community to try and get some sort of answers as to what it may have been, as I know for a fact what we all saw, and it will live for me forever as it is really unexplainable. It was not a scary experience but rather a weird one, which has led me to more questions than anything. Creepy encounter alone on a hiking trail. When I was in high school, I played on the basketball team and ran track. To keep my cardio up, I used to run this 11 kilometers hiking trail that went through the hills right outside of my town. It was a small town, it was safe for the most part, and everybody knew each other. I wouldn't call this trail remote, because at certain points you'd pass a dog park, train tracks, and one stretch of it ran alongside the highway. However, certain sections of the trail were quite deep in the woods. There was an option to do a 4 kilometers loop inside of this 11 kilometers trail, and people traveled this route much more often. I hardly ever ran into anybody on the longer trailer. I ran this same trail for 3 years, and nothing strange ever happened until this one day. It started off as it normally did. I parked my car on the dirt road that came off of the highway and smoked a joint while queuing songs on my phone. I put my earphones in, popped a piece of gum in my mouth, and began walking toward the trail. The only things I took with me on my runs were my phone, earphones, and a single car key wrapped around my index finger. I don't recall seeing anybody on the trail that day. It was in the afternoon, and it wasn't abnormal for the trail to be less busy than it would have been during the evening. I walked for a few minutes while I was still on the crushed stone path. Once you got a little ways into the trail, it turned pretty rugged. The trail was covered in dirt and mud, with large tree roots extending in all directions. I liked this trail because I had to focus on where my feet were landing with every step, so I was less focused on how much energy I was exerting. I was about halfway through the 11 kilometers loop, and this was really the most remote part of it. It was all forest, and there were many hills and dips in the path and big boulders all around you. I didn't see or hear anything odd, but out of nowhere, I had this extreme sense of dread come over me. I kept running and didn't really react. Once I reached a flatter part of the trail just a few feet ahead, I took out my earphones while keeping the same running pace. I noticed it was eerily silent, but I didn't experience a moment where I acknowledged that meant there's likely some sort of predator in the area. The only wildlife predators that could have been near me were a coyote, and possibly a bear. However, bear sightings are extremely rare in this town. I slowed my jog to a walk because the trail got steep and I had to walk over knee-high rocks, but I was still moving fast because I felt like something was behind me. For some reason, this next part is very difficult to remember. Just this slice of about 30 seconds feels almost like I'm trying to recall a dream that I had, but I saw something out in the trees. When I try to remember, I can't fully picture it, almost like looking at a blurry image. It wasn't an animal, it was a person. I can't explain it, but I could clearly sense that it was a male. I pretended not to see the figure in the trees. I remember doing this so they wouldn't know that I was aware of them. It felt subconscious, automatic, and 100% instinctive. The figure wasn't behind me in the way that it felt when I first sensed a presence. It was in front of me, but on the side, my 2 o'clock to be exact. It didn't move as I walked by, the person just stood there completely still and watched me pass. Once I reached the turn, approximately 15 feet ahead, I ran so fast that it felt like my feet might detach from my body. I remember how weak my knees felt in this sprint, but adrenaline was carrying me out of there at a speed that was faster than I've ever moved in my life. I didn't hear footsteps, but it felt like they were right behind me. It felt as though 2 hands were poised to grab me at any moment. Primal fear. I didn't stop running until I was out of the trees and could see my car. The event may feel anticlimactic, but nothing happened, and when I looked back after leaving the trees, there was nobody there. My adrenaline was flooding the entire time, but the deep sense of dread left a couple of minutes after it arrived. I just knew I couldn't stop running until I was out. I think somebody was coming after me because they saw a 5-foot, young girl with long blonde hair running alone in the woods. Perhaps they were waiting for someone to pass by, but my intuition tells me they were there for a different purpose, and I just happened to walk by at the wrong moment. I know it may seem like I just smoked a joint, went into the woods alone, and wigged out. But I'd been smoking weed every day for about 5 years at this point, not proud of how young I was when I started lol, and I did this every single time before I went for a run on that trail. I ran on that trail 4 times a week for 3 years. Nothing like this ever happened to me before or after this run. However, I changed my route after 2 or 3 additional runs. I didn't feel the sense of dread that I felt that day, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it might happen again. Occasionally I wonder if something would have happened to me if I kept running there. I don't live there anymore, I haven't for a while, and I haven't heard of anything bad happening there. But someone was in the woods that day, and they didn't have good intentions when they saw me walk by. Has anybody else ever been out in the woods and experienced this sense of dread without seeing or hearing danger? I'd love to read any similar experiences. We all know about the primal instincts that we carry with us as humans, how we can feel a set of eyes on us long before ours are ever on them. What do you think? Was there somebody out in the woods that day, Or did I just spook myself until I ran out of the woods like an idiot? For context, I'm a very skeptical person. I love these topics, and I'm totally open to hearing stories, but I have to say that 99.9% of the time my bullshit meter is flying off the charts for some true stories. If I can in any way find a logical explanation for some weirdness I encounter, I'm highly likely to lean in that direction. That being said, like 10 years ago, I and my inner group of friends loved going ghost hunting. Partly because the topic was fun and partly because we just wanted to get out and explore weird and creepy spots. Growing up in Fayetteville, North Carolina, there are a couple of spots of interest that we found. One of which was near the main railroad that ran through our downtown area. Allegedly, people would claim to see bright lights trailing down the tracks at night as if someone was walking with a lantern but void of a person/train/lighting system, etc., etc., etc. So one Saturday night, I and 6 others decided to take a long walk down the tracks at night to see if anything interesting popped up. After a couple of miles of walking, we were well into a wooded area and close-ish to the tracks. We managed to spot an open field. This was one of those supermoon kind of nights where it was just insanely bright and none of us really needed to use any lights. So this field is about the size of a football field with knee-high grass. One of the guys spotted what looked like a silhouette of a person standing on the far side of the field. Not doing anything in particular. Just standing. Immediately we were all like, yeah, that's pretty creepy, and like a bunch of idiot post-teens, we obviously decided to check it out. So this is when things really start to get weird. As we start to approach the individual, they would duck down into the grass. Once we got to the spot, there would be no trace of anyone. Until we turned around. The same silhouette would now be on the complete opposite side of the field. So for reference, this person was able to completely circle us and crawl or super low walk almost 100 yards in almost no time without any of us seeing them move until they popped back up. We basically ran back and forth on this field, like 4 or 5 times with the same thing happening each time. We were never able to get close enough to make out any details on the person. All we saw was the silhouette of a completely black human form. After that last encounter, the shape simply vanished and did not reappear. After some light conversation about just how creepy that all was, we decided to start heading back. This is when things really ramped up for us. In all, we were 6 guys and 1 girl. As we were almost back to the tracks, we noticed she wasn't behind us anymore. After an initial panic and some searching, we found her back in the field standing close to one of the tree lines. She was just staring at it, not moving at all. When we approached her asking what the hell was going on, she was just mumbling that she needed to go into the woods. We had our lights out at that point and could see that there was some weirdness going on. Her eyes were totally dilated, and she was sweating pretty hard. Before it even becomes a question, no, there were no drugs being used or anything else consumed. We were all for some drinking parties, and some of us were okay with smoking pot and whatnot, but this wasn't one of those nights. Everyone was stone sober. Anyway, the dilated eyes were weird. However, the most unusual aspect was the clearly visible mark on her arm, which stood out due to her pale skin. It looked like a hand mark where someone grabbed her arm, but it was red and puffy, almost like a burn. That and the finger marks looked crazy long. Again. Strange. So she's mumbling about going into the woods, pouring sweat, and then starts to sort of push her way towards the tree line. One of the guys with us, who happened to be the largest of us, put himself in front of her, trying to block her. This skinny 5 feet 4 inches 5'5" girl knocked this very in shape 6 foot 2 6'3" guy to the ground like it was nothing. Completely winded him. It took all of us to hold her down after this. The whole time she's screaming her head off that she needs to go in there. Like a minute of that, and then she starts violently vomiting, and just like that, it was over. She seemed totally fine. We asked her what the hell happened, and she stands by that she completely blacked out and had no recollection of those last few minutes. Again, not being there, my mind would go to drug use, but this is one of those situations where you'll just have to trust me that there was none involved. Additionally, I'm no expert, but I'm personally not familiar with any drugs that have that kind of profound effect and burn out of you within a 5 to 10 minute span with zero after effects other than just not remembering what happened. Anyway, after that we basically booked it out of there. The walk through the woods and back through the tracks was super uncomfortable, but nothing else happened. And that's it. One of my 3 stories that I have a hard time wrapping my head around. This happened around 1997 when I was 19 years old. A creative outlet my friends and I enjoyed was filmmaking. We'd write our scripts and produce them on the smallest budget possible. We produced these using only a VHS camcorder. One of our most harrowing experiences occurred the Labor Day weekend of 1997 during the production of a cheesy spy movie. Not far from where two of the actors lived was a waterway that provided a great locale for filming. Along the waterway was a wooded shoreline pierced by a long, lonely trail that went nowhere. Along the trail were some nice-looking cliffs and boulders that descended down into the water. We were near a place where a boat ramp once existed. They had since closed it off. It was my friends Gideon, Cody, and I who trekked out to this place to get the final shots we needed for the movie. Cody's brother David had to work that day and could not join us. A guardrail had blocked off the boat ramp access, forcing us to park along the road. We unloaded the camera and what few props that were needed and began our hike along the trail to the spot where we wanted to film. It took 10 or 15 minutes to reach the spot, and we were getting ready to film when we heard a friendly voice coming down the trail behind us yell, "Hello." Three of us, thinking that David had been able to join us after all, replied back with an equally jovial greeting. However, the person coming down the trail was not David. A disheveled-looking man none of us had ever seen came around the bend. The man was older than all of us and looked like he had shaved in the dark. His face showed signs of a beard in some areas, and he exuded an aura that suggested he was a screw-up. His first question was, "Do you all remember me?" And he proceeded to tell us he had helped pull a girl who had been cliff jumping into the water to safety at this same spot 8 months before. They would have seen the girl cliff jumping in January, in freezing weather. His questions continued. He asked if any of us knew Mayo. Of course none of us did. He inquired about what we were doing, and I told him that we were making a movie. With his next question, things became all the more bizarre. "Who here has a driver's license?" was the question that took things from strange to creepy. I told him I did. He told me he needed a ride to a nearby highway so he could call his wife to come pick him up from the convenience store there. He said he could not do this himself because he was driving on a suspended license and his uncle, a cop, had just driven by and seen him. I informed him that we would take some time to film, but he replied that he didn't mind waiting and watching. The more this idiot spoke, the more uneasy I got. Despite my uneasy feelings, my naive 19-year-old mind still wanted to help the person, but I would rather not give him a ride. I came up with a good compromise. I told him that we would go back to Cody's house nearby, call his wife for him, and inform her where to pick him up. Oh, this person didn't like that. With a hint of suspicion and anger, he asked, "I know you, don't I?" I told him I didn't think he did. He then followed with, "Because if you are who I think you are, I better start learning how to swim." Apparently, if I was this person he feared me being, he was better off jumping off the cliff and splashing around in the water than he was just running down the trail to get away. His bizarre banter continued, "Because if you were at the Cherokee Apache rally last month, I am in trouble." For some reason, I felt compelled to assuage his fears. I told him I had not even been in town at that time. This was true, I'd been away at school. He replied if I was not who he thought I was, I had no reason to defend myself. Even though I felt uneasy, I did extend one final offer to call his wife for him. He declined, saying he was going to find some friends of his, and began walking back to the road. Once the mysterious stranger had left us, I very half-heartedly suggested we start setting up the shot we needed to film. Cody and Gideon said we should leave, and I agreed. As we walked back, Cody shared that he noticed the man drive past us twice while we were unloading the filming equipment from the car. I remember very cautiously making my way back down the trail and being relieved that my car was still there with all its windows and tires unharmed and that the man and his car were gone. Filming would be relocated to the other side of the waterway, where homes and other people provided safety. This location turned out to be better than the original spot anyway. We filmed the rest of our scenes and had fun, but there was still that twinge of fear within me that the man would return with others. In retrospect, the creepiness of this day seems even greater. Perhaps with age comes more horror stories of what people are capable of doing for no valid reason. I wonder what the guy's true motivations were that day and whether my non-confrontational replies to his questions and comments somehow saved the three of us. Our not giving him a ride certainly did not keep him from getting back in his car and driving away. There was another convenience store within walking distance of where we parked. Why did he want a ride from us? There are some strange folks in this world, and that day we met one of them. This happened about a month ago, and it's really been bugging me since. My family has owned a cabin since the 1960s, and I have been visiting it for my entire life. It's nestled in a little town of less than 2,000 and surrounded by vast forests and farmland. You see cows everywhere and stray dogs who will let you pet them. You'll maybe see 30 people in a day if you go in the little town of shops and small mom and pop restaurants. Since I've been going here my entire life, I pretty much know everyone, or my family knows everyone. Men dress in Western clothes with big jeans and old flannel shirts and belts with big ass buckles. Women dress in jeans and tank tops with Country Factory logos on them. They're all nice enough but keep to themselves. So I'm driving up there one night to meet my parents since they had gone down the night previously to open the cabin for spring. My boyfriend had also flown in so he could meet my family, who lived up there. I had been driving until it got dark, about a 2-hour and 10-minute drive from my house, and he had taken over driving around 10 p.m. There's also a little national park close by, about 15 miles in total of land, and since I had fallen asleep and couldn't give directions, he decided to log the address into the GPS. It took him through the back way of the park that I never drive through, so when he woke me up to ask where to turn next since the GPS said he could go either way, it took me a minute to figure out where the hell we were. There were no lights anywhere, and we were the only car for those 15 miles. Long forests with tall, giant trees on either side of the road, with a lonely deer or two in the woods to keep us company. I mentioned switching drivers because I remember that road, the entrance to the park, would lead directly to the intersection that would go through a small community up to the mountain my cabin was on, but it was prime leave a toy baby on the side of the road and kidnap someone when they check it out territory. It was dark enough and the forest was thick enough that we joked some cult members could be hiding out there. Hell, maybe they were. Needless to say, we decided stopping wasn't a good idea. We eventually passed through a small clearing/intersection, not the one we wanted, with a dinky concrete building on the side of the road with one light on and a car pulled in the slanted gravel ground. My boyfriend drives forward, and we see two people there. My gut immediately twisted, and I started to feel sick enough to feel ice cold run through my veins and need a hand on my stomach. You never see people at night here. It was two kids, teen boys in fact, probably around 15. The boys were dressed in city clothes, including Nike shorts and brightly colored sports workout clothing, which made them look very out of place. They saw us coming and walked away from what looked to be an old, beat-up El Camino, probably a 1965. It's important to note that the paint was completely gone, and it had a light brown dirt or rust covering the body. They waved and smiled at us, and that was what freaked me out the most. I didn't have a damn clue who these people were, and I knew a gas station that was right up the road. They could just walk there, I could see it past the road and overhead bridge. That building was also abandoned, so how was there a light on the wall? They walked out onto the road, almost blocking us from going forward, and my boyfriend had to slow down to not hit them as they continuously waved their arms and smiled at us, maybe saying something, but I couldn't hear. I remember mine and my boyfriend's conversation going something like this. "Should we stop?" he asked, looking nervously at me with a hand on the gear shift. "No, absolutely not, just keep driving," I said, clenching the door handle and double-checking it to be locked. "But babe, could they be in trouble?" "I don't care, I don't know them. My gut is telling me we need to leave. That building is abandoned, it shouldn't have light, and hell, their car is abandoned. Just drive, please." He quickly drove around them and slammed on the gas, trying to calm me down since the whole scene scared me in such a specific and bizarre way. Images of getting out of our car as some stranger got in flew through my head. I looked behind us, and they stood in the middle of the road with a cross between an angry look and a calm stare and didn't move from the road until we turned and couldn't see them anymore. Who were those kids? Why were they wearing city clothes? They looked too young to be driving cars, and I knew for a damn fact that the car they acted like they owned had been there for months. I knew because I remember seeing it last summer when my dad pointed out the model, and I said how I wanted an El Camino someday. We finally made it out and found the intersection we wanted that led to the familiar gas station, and he didn't hesitate when I said I needed to drive next. About 10 or so minutes later we got to my cabin, half-heartedly laughing about it the whole way there. When I told my parents about it, they didn't reprimand us for not stopping. It was almost 12 a.m. by that time, and the night wasn't so bad that those kids would freeze, and they agreed with us the whole situation was weird. Should I have stopped? Maybe. Can I change what I did? No. Did I feel comfortable stopping? Absolutely not. Dancer in the dark. This is a true story. This happened about 13 years ago, when I was a sophomore in college, attending a liberal arts school in Suffolk County, New York. Within the first month or two of freshman year, I had found myself in a very tight-knit group of fellow theater geeks, 6 guys, myself included, and 1 girl. And they all loved horror movies and ghost stories. I had found my crew. We supported each other through a tough freshman year, making it more enjoyable. At the start of our sophomore year, we resolved that during the peak of the Halloween season in October, we would seek out a spooky, forested location in a nearby town and terrorize ourselves. And that's precisely what happened. We did some research and found that there was a particularly isolated area about 30 minutes away, infamous for paranormal sightings. Perfect. The 7 of us split into 2 different cars and headed out into the night. Allow me to set the scene. You turn off a busy main road, flooded with strip malls and restaurants and whatnot, and you are almost immediately greeted by complete darkness. Again, this area was very heavily wooded. It was essentially a large web of winding roads surrounded by trees. Very few streetlights and very few houses. Without a GPS or a good sense of direction, one could easily get lost in there. We all made sure to have fully charged phones and flashlights, just in case, but the goal was to keep driving until we collectively decided to pull over and go exploring. Following the directions, we turned left off the main road and drove for about 30 minutes into this dark network, choosing directions at random and intentionally getting lost. Our cars made a turn, and, to our surprise, there was a huge log in front of us, turned on its side. We had arrived at a seemingly unending stretch of road, surrounded only by trees. We all got out to see what exactly the matter was, stepped over the log, and noticed 2 narrow trails leading in different directions. This seemed like as good a time as any to grab our flashlights and do some amateur ghost hunting. We flipped a coin and set off on the trail to the right. The trail was so narrow that we had to walk single file to avoid getting whacked by branches. For whatever reason, I ended up in the back. Usually, I maintain a rational and level-headed demeanor, but as we ventured deeper, an uneasy feeling increasingly overwhelmed me. Deep in the woods, I continued to hear sounds, unable to shake the feeling that someone was watching us. I thought I was imagining it since I was the only one who heard it. And, in any case, the whole point of us being there was to get scared. We should not overlook the reality that we were 7 physically strong college students. What could possibly threaten us during our adventure? We headed down this trail for about 20 minutes, and just when I thought it would never end, we came to a massive clearing, and I mean massive. It was a large, open field of unkempt grass. It was comparable in scope to a golf course, but not nearly as well manicured. We couldn't see the end of the huge field, which was surrounded by trees. I was glad to leave that narrow trail, but I didn't expect to find such a large area. One of us looked to the right and said, "Hey, check that out." We all turned, and there was an old, dilapidated house several hundred yards away. The house was completely dark, with no cars or signs of anyone actually living there. We walked over and shined our flashlights at it, and sure enough, the windows and doors were all boarded up. I managed to peer between the boards on one of the windows, and what I could see was an old white couch covered in plastic, but an otherwise empty room. Whoever had once resided here had long since departed. We were too creeped out by the house to go in, so we walked back to the trail we came from, sat in the field, and decided what to do next. We walked towards the narrow trail, but before we could sit, my friend Mark stopped what he was doing. His expression dropped, and he pointed. We all turned, and on a very far side of the field, directly across from where we had come in, we could see someone tall, lanky, and pale dancing among the trees. And by dancing, I mean it was skipping around, grabbing a tree, swinging around it, and then doing the same to another tree. Basically, a do-si-do. The moon was so bright and the woods so dark, it actually took a second for us to really understand what we were looking at. Jay, the 6 feet 4 inches skeptic of the group, wasn't seeing it. I leaned into him, pointed in that direction, and said, "Jay, look where I'm pointing. Don't you see that?" He squinted a bit, and the second that he saw it, he gasped with everything he had, clutched my arm, and whispered, "What the duck is that?" What happened next shocked all of us. Whoever this was, they stopped dancing, looked in our direction, and started charging straight at us. Without even thinking, we freaked and ran back to the trail. Yet again, Jay was the only one who didn't see what was happening. He shouted after us, "Guys, what is it? Where are you going?" After about 15 seconds of running like hell, I heard Jay scream, "Holy shit." I looked back and saw his flashlight following the rest of us into the trail. While the walk into the woods took about 20 minutes, we made it back to our 2 cars, hopped in, and were peeling away in closer to 5. We parked, got out, and talked about what happened once we were far enough away. My heart was pounding, and I know everyone else was feeling the same way. Nearly 15 years later, we are all still friends, living in different states yet keeping in touch through marriages, divorces, children, etc. Occasionally, one of us will spontaneously send a group text to the others, asking, "The woods? That really happened, right?" It most certainly did. I will always remember that experience. Here's the thing that still resonates with me about that night. At 1 a.m., they danced wildly in the woods and ran toward a group of young adults, undeterred by their numbers. Did he know we were there from the second we parked? Was he the source of the sound I kept hearing while we walked the trail? Whatever the case may be, when he came for us that night, you can be sure none of us wanted to stick around and see what he was truly capable of. This story happened when I was in college. There was something about my early years in college that just seemed to bring on a slew of experiences that ranged from creepy to terrifying. I don't know what it was about that time in my life. This experience was somewhere in the middle of that spectrum. Anyway, one night, at the beginning of the summer following my freshman year of college, some of my high school friends and I were going to a party. We hadn't seen a ton of each other in the preceding year because of us all being away at college, mostly just during school breaks and a few random weekends here and there, so we were all feeling giddy at having the whole summer together. I wouldn't have normally gone to this party, hosted by someone else we went to high school with, but they all wanted to go, and I wanted to hang out with them, so I agreed. That is not the mistake I made in this story, that would come later that night. We got to the party, and we realized it was almost exclusively people from high school, which was kind of nice actually. It was like a big reunion. My previous inhibitions vanished quickly, partly due to the fact that I began consuming screwdrivers as soon as I arrived. A couple of hours later, I was considerably tipsy. No, I was fully intoxicated, but not completely intoxicated, a fact that would ultimately prove to be my savior in this narrative. After a while, a group of my friends decided to split off. The host of this party, Stephanie, still lived in her parents' house, and it was in the middle of nowhere, basically near a forest. Forests at night both scare and enthrall me, so drunk me suggested that we go exploring. This is something my friends would not let me live down, not ever. So anyway, this group, Lauren, Hillary, Jared, Alex, Hugo, Dean, and hostess Stephanie, plus myself, obviously, decided to go on a midnight walk through the woods. It was pretty creepy, not gonna lie, but in a cool way, at least I thought so. A couple of people in the group, namely Hillary and Alex, were pretty afraid, but Hillary went because her best friend was Lauren, and Alex had a thing for Hillary and Lauren, which was a whole thing and not the point of the story, but because of that, they both were there. They kept making remarks about how creeped out they were, and I kept telling them to relax. No one else is out here, I told them. Let's just enjoy this time together. Being drunk makes me weirdly sentimental, okay? After strolling through the forest for a while, we emerged into a clearing surrounded by a lake, a dock, tall grass, and debris. Additionally, there was a shed and what appeared to be a boathouse, both of which had seen better times. Dean and Hugo had been here before, but this was my first time exploring the forest with Stephanie, who I wasn't very close to. They mentioned that they thought Stephanie's parents forbade them from going back here because it wasn't their property, which was true. It was like suddenly Stephanie realized where we were. I wasn't the only drunk one, okay? And her eyes got super wide, and she looked nervous. She expressed concern rather than fear, suggesting that we should return. I told her that everything was fine since you can totally trust the judgment of a drunk person, and because everyone else was drunk, they all agreed with me, save for Steph, but she was outnumbered and not about to go back alone. Even Hillary and Alex were okay with staying, and because logic is a friend to drunk people everywhere, I suggested we play hide and seek, and most everyone agreed. Honestly, I don't understand why people kept listening to me. Now, if I'd been sober, this was the kind of place I'd be kind of freaked out about. In a cool way, sure, but not in a let's play hide and seek kind of way. This is where things go wrong. Hugo was forced to be it because we were assholes and told him he didn't have a choice, so he went into the woods and counted while we all ran to hide. I saw Dean dart into the shed, but everyone else ran into the woods. I decided to duck down in the tall grass, which varied in height. Sometimes I could kneel, and sometimes I had to be on my stomach to be totally concealed. While I was hiding, I heard whispering voices from the nearby trees, as if the speakers were attempting to remain silent. I was curious, so I made my way toward the voices, first on my hands and knees and then eventually army crawling as the grass got shorter. I nearly shit my pants when I ran into Stephanie in the grass, who turned out to be doing the exact same thing as me. When we got closer, we realized that it was Lauren and Jared, and that was how Steph and I realized they liked each other. We were listening to them flirt and looking at each other hopefully, and I swear we had a telepathic conversation about how good they would be together, but then we heard someone barreling toward us through the grass. Heart pounding, I turned to see who it was just as Hugo threw himself down next to Stephanie and me, and he looked terrified. Hugo, what the duck? I whispered a hiss because there was no way he'd counted as high as we were making him. We were being real jerks to Hugo that night, sorry, man. He first looked around frantically, and then he told us what had him spooked. I'll never forget this episode because of the sheer terror I saw on Hugo's face and heard in his voice. There's someone in the woods, he told us. Stephanie tried to tell him that it was probably someone else from the party, but Hugo said no. Hugo explained that he had seen the man and hid behind a tree, noting that the man appeared to be in his 40s. He also mentioned that the guy looked rough and that he had a bad feeling, which prompted him to leave quickly. It was purely by chance that he found both Stephanie and me. He's looking for something, or someone, Hugo said, telling us that the guy was shining a flashlight around. As if on cue, someone came walking out of the woods, and then he called out, "Jim. Are you out here?" He sounded kind of angry, and now I felt stone cold sober. This wasn't right, and it was about to get worse because that was when we saw the shadow of someone rowing a boat down the lake toward the dock. The first guy walked onto the dock to meet this guy, Jim, presumably, and I heard him demand, "Where is he?" The first guy sounded angry, like he was expecting another person to be there too, and the second guy / Jim informed the first. I ducked up. They proceeded to argue, though I couldn't hear what they were saying, and then they went into the boathouse. I was fairly certain that no one was hiding in the boathouse, but I was concerned about that and the fact that two suspicious men were engaging in what appeared to be questionable activities. We needed to get out of there, I knew that, but Dean was still in the shed, which was too close to the boathouse for comfort given the situation. Lauren and Jared were now making out and totally oblivious, and Hillary and Alex were, God knows, where. Why had I suggested hide and seek? That was what I kept asking myself while I tried to formulate a plan. Then we heard someone running through the woods, but like they were trying to do so quietly, and I turned to see Hillary. It looked like she was trying to find somewhere else to hide, unaware of what was happening, and I saw her run toward the boathouse. It was like time stopped, and I didn't know what to do, how to stop her. Honestly, I froze, but then Hillary hesitated when she got to the door. She would later tell us that the voices she heard inside gave her pause, thank Jesus, and then the door swung open. It was like something out of a movie. Hillary was now hiding behind the open door, and the first guy stood in the doorway, looking around. I think he must have heard Hillary, who was not being nearly as quiet as she thought she was. If he shut the door from the outside, he would likely catch sight of Hillary, which would have resulted in dire consequences for us. Luckily he went back inside and closed the door. We had to get the hell out of there, but we still had to get Dean, Lauren, and Jared and find Alex. We didn't have a lot of time, I didn't think, so we had to be fast. And then suddenly Hugo stood up, cupped his hands around his mouth, and bellowed, "Caw-caw. Caw-caw." He seemed to believe we were in a movie. I just looked at him with a "what the duck, Hugo?" expression on my face. It was not what I would have done, but I'll be damned, it worked. Hillary came sprinting toward us, as did Alex, who had been hiding behind the boathouse. Likewise, Dean emerged from the shed, and Lauren and Jared detached themselves from each other. Alas, the two men in the boathouse heard us too and came busting out, but by that point we were all sprinting away. I swear, I've never before nor since run that fast. At one point, Stephanie tripped, and I practically ripped her arm out of her socket while pulling her to her feet. Sorry, Steph. The guys chased us for a bit at least, though I don't know how long because we just kept running until we got back to Stephanie's house. The party was still going, and the men hadn't followed us beyond the woods, but we were too freaked out to stay. I called my brother to come pick us up, and we all left, even Stephanie, who left her house unattended save for the drunk partygoers. We spent the night at my brother's house that night, and then we went back to Steph's house to help clean up the next day because, honestly, this experience kind of bonded us in a weird way. Lauren and Jared are now married, Hillary and Alex were both in the wedding. Alex even briefly mentioned this incident in his speech. I lived with Dean for a bit following college, and Hugo is one of my best friends, as is Stephanie, which is weird because we weren't really friends before that. But I swear, we thought we were going to die that night, all of us, except maybe Lauren and Jared. Even Dean heard what was happening outside the shed and was waiting for the right time to make his escape. Experiencing something like that inevitably brings people closer together. It's strange but also kind of nice, like we have this shared history, which was true before this because of going to school together, but it's different now. I wanted to go back to investigate in the light of day, but only Dean wanted to go with me, and I thought maybe that wasn't enough people. I was still pretty spooked, though intrigued. Stephanie told us later, though, that she told her dad when her parents got home later that day, and he and a few of his friends went back there and didn't find anything out of the ordinary. They moved shortly thereafter, not because of this, so we never found out what happened. But we've also never forgotten it. Creepy late-night encounters at a gorgeous waterfall. I genuinely have no clue why I haven't said anything about this yet considering so much weird stuff happens in my life, but this was probably one of the creepiest encounters I've ever had, and I feel lucky that I walked away. One summer night a few years ago, I was out for a drive with a friend. We decided to make a little late night stop at a nearby waterfall for a little smoke sesh since it was always super dead and really peaceful in the evenings. This specific time, I didn't make it anywhere near the waterfall. As we were getting out of the car, I, 19F at the time, really had to pee. I used to frequently visit this waterfall, so I was familiar with the area, even in the dark. So, I went and found a spot where it was too dark for me to see more than maybe 2 feet in front of me, so I tried to stay as close to the forest exit as possible without being seen by a semi-busy road. Throughout my entire stay, I was certain that someone was keeping a close eye on me. Very closely. I ended up getting out of there as fast as ducking possible, jumping in the car and locking the doors. That entire time, I could feel someone's eyes digging into me like daggers. I was genuinely prepared for someone to grab me. What confirmed I was definitely being watched happened when I got back to the car. I saw a kid run across the street directly up to where I was. He came from nowhere, literal cliff on one side, hence the waterfall, and I could genuinely only describe him as the little boy from the Jungle Book. Clothing and all. I get majorly weird vibes every time I go there now that I never, ever got before. It still has a weird feeling in the day. I genuinely don't even know how this happened so quickly. The kid would have had to scale a large cliff and moved at a super high speed. I'm going with the most logical explanation in my city, which is people living in the woods with possible ulterior motives, but at this point I'm not ruling anything out. This was by far the weirdest and creepiest encounter I've had in a long time, that I recall, and it has honestly just kind of stuck with me. I hate going to this waterfall now, which absolutely sucks because it's so close to my house and it's absolutely gorgeous. I don't know, I just got the weirdest vibes. Al-Zou, just before anyone says anything, I know how stupid this was. But I was 19, and I'm stubborn as all hell, so nothing would have talked me out of peeing in a place where I needed a flashlight. Safe to say I've never been back up to that part of the park since. Stalked in the cornfields. One of my best friends from when I was 14 was Matt. His family lived out in the country on the corner of an intersection adjacent to miles of cornfields. It was right on the edge of going out into the middle of nowhere. They had a wooden fenced-in backyard with a barn they used to store everything for their lawn and garden. However, there was a second story with a balcony that we turned into our hangout spot, and we'd often run power up there and camp out during the summer. It would usually end up being about 6 to 8 of us just hanging out and having a blast. Well, being out there and not wanting to be holed up in the barn all night, we would usually go out in the yard, walk down the country roads at night, or go through the fields and walk the creeks. It sounds boring, but we always had a blast doing that. Exploring at night with nobody around, keeping the flashlights off and adjusting your eyes to the darkness, not having to worry about cars or people being around. We would always feel safe, being that we would always go out in groups of 6 to 8 of us. That and the farmers of the area gave us permission to go through the fields, so long as there were no crops at the time. So one fall night, after the 6 of us got bored of playing video games for hours on end, we decided to go walk through the adjacent fields. It was around 11 p.m. when we decided to head out, so we threw a couple flashlights in the backpack and headed off. It was a nice, cool night, the moon was just a sliver, and the sky didn't have a cloud in it. It was perfect. We trekked through the first field just laughing it up and having a great time, but all of our cheer would soon turn to absolute dread. There was a creek and a ravine dividing 2 of the fields that we followed, getting further and further until Matt's house was on the horizon. At this point we had been walking for about an hour and a half, it was going on 12:30 a.m. We decided we would walk a little further and then turn back, something we all greatly regretted. As we made our way down the creek, we noticed what looked like a stump on the other side way up ahead in the field, maybe about 20 feet away from the creek. It was odd because we had made this journey dozens of times, and there was never a tree, let alone a stump, in that field. As our curiosity piqued, we decided to check it out. It was still about 100 feet up the creek, but we decided to jump the creek and go check it out. The first 2, Chris and Mike, jumped over the creek, and right as Matt was getting ready to jump, my heart sank. The stump moved. As soon as I blurted out, "Wait, it just moved." It stood up. The silhouette of a man standing in the field in the middle of nowhere was now facing us. We were all frozen. Chris and Mike jumped back over to our side of the creek, and we slowly started backing away, not looking away from the figure. It stood there for about a minute, which seemed like an eternity, then started off on a full-on sprint on the other side of the creek, heading right for us. We instantly turned around and ran as fast as we could away from the creek to the road and went straight for Matt's house. We could vaguely make out glimpses of it from the road, just waiting for it to jump the creek and catch up with us. The adrenaline had my feet moving so fast it felt like I was floating. As we came up on the last 1/4 mile stretch of road before making it back, we noticed the figure had stopped, barely making out his silhouette across the field. We ran around the back of Matt's house and went straight to our loft in the barn, locking the doors behind us. A huge sigh of relief filled the air. We were safe. Shaken, we all couldn't wrap our heads around the fact that there was some psycho just crouching in a field in the middle of the night. We finally started to calm down and relax a bit. Being too afraid to leave the barn, we just decided when we had to piss, we'd piss off the balcony. As the night went on, around 2:30, Mike went to go do his business. Not 10 seconds later, he comes bursting back in, his face pale white. He's ducking walking through the neighbor's backyard. At this point I seriously thought we were going to die. Why is he following us? Why is he so persistent on finding us? What does he want? We quietly made our way down the stairs and got to the door. At this point we had no idea where he was, so we could either wait it out and hope he didn't see/hear us up in the loft or make a run for the house. We all agreed that we would be much safer behind the deadbolt of a house versus the small lock that could be kicked in on the barn. So we ran for the house, key in hand, ready, praying it wouldn't get dropped on the way. Shortly after we all piled in the back door, which leads to the garage with another door from the garage to the house, we all stood silent as we heard the gate to the fence creak open. After hearing silence, we slowly crept into the house, trying not to make a noise. Matt made his way to his parents' room as we stood still in the kitchen, peering out the window to the backyard, unfortunately only seeing darkness. He woke his parents, told them everything, and they instantly called the police. As this was going on, we all listened in horror to what sounded like someone demolishing the barn. We all hid in the living room, hoping this freak wouldn't break into the house before the police arrived. After what seemed like forever, the police showed up and stormed the backyard. Whoever it was that was after us was now gone. The barn door was kicked in, the whole upstairs looked like a tornado went through it, TV, game systems, table all smashed, and creepiest of all, the back door handle to the house has been smashed off. Thank God for the deadbolt, or we might have been hanging on meat hooks by daytime. We never slept up there again, never went on night walks, and never returned to those fields. Matt's family moved a few years later, and I've never gone back to that area. They never caught the guy, and we never saw his face. I think about it all the time, it just gives me a chill every time I think about the fact that he wasn't caught, he could still be out there. I'll never understand why he was crouched in that field in the middle of the night, a good mile at least from the nearest house, and what caused him to snap and want to get to us so bad. I really wonder if it was someone drugged up on PCP, but how did he end up there? There are so many questions that I'll never get answers to, and knowing he wasn't caught is the worst part. My friend and I went hiking, and I'm starting to think she never left those woods. My friend Samantha and I were so excited to take a road trip together to go hiking somewhere further from home. We'd been talking about it since we graduated college a few years back and finally found the time. Well, she always made the time, it was mainly me who had trouble balancing work with anything else. Looking back now, I wish I had spent more of this trip focusing on Sam, the scenery, and being present in the moment. I wish I had been a better friend. Sam was the most excited for our trip. The week before we left, she was texting me about restaurants in the area and stuff to do. She made a Spotify playlist with both of our favorites so we could listen to 7 hours worth of an eclectic mix of classic rock, pop, and black metal, and she was marking trailheads we might enjoy on her Google Maps app. I felt guilty for putting the trip off for so long. We got to catch up, explore, and try cool food. We had a great trip up until our final hike. We're both in decent shape, and since we had the supplies and plenty of daylight, we decided we were going to try a longer, unpaved trail that went around this beautiful lake. It was the last hike of our trip, and we decided to take a more difficult and less crowded trail. Initially, it was a wonderful hike. The water was such a surreal shade of blue, and the pine trees and rolling hills were breathtaking. The air was notably thinner than our usual experience, yet it was incredibly refreshing. As we hiked around one bend, I almost ran right into Sam's back. I had been falling behind, focusing on placing my feet in exactly the right locations in the soft dirt so I didn't go sliding down 20 feet to the shore. Sam stood frozen, a deer in front of her blocking the trail. As I approached with my backpack jingling and breathing heavily, the deer stood for a moment more, tilting its head sideways at me before darting back into the pines. She looked back at me, her face tight. "Did you see that? The deer? Yeah, it was pretty magical." She gave a little laugh as she started up again so we could both move on to the section of the trail that had sturdier footing. No, I mean, something was wrong with that deer. It was far too comfortable around me, and I don't know if you could see or hear it, but it was drooling and making these weird sounds. We took pictures and focused on our footing and the scenery in silence. Once, when we were stopped, we heard rustling to our right, higher up on the hill. I got the bear spray out and held onto it. It seemed to be walking parallel to us, roughly matching our pace. It sounded big, too. Eventually the hiking trail rose to meet the higher part of the hill, and I couldn't help but sigh in relief. I'd been so worried I'd roll my ankle and tumble down the mountain, so it was good to have more room so I wasn't walking right on the edge. Back in college I'd sprained my ankle badly but couldn't afford to see a doctor. It healed in an unusual way, and since then, I have experienced ongoing issues with my left ankle. After a while, I needed to sit for a moment. Walking uphill for an hour in addition to the 6,500-foot elevation, I was struggling. Maybe I'm also a bit more out of shape than I had been willing to admit, too. Sam sat with me for a moment, but then saw some wildflowers about 10 feet into the woods and left to go take a quick picture. With her gone, I felt a sudden chill. Something was watching me. "Sam," I called out nervously as the rustling grew louder and I gripped my container of bear spray tightly. It stepped out of the woods, and it was just a deer. Or, more specifically, it was the deer, the same one that Sam and I had encountered. Now that she had pointed it out, I could see what she was saying. The deer had no issues approaching me. It was scrawny and walked slowly, like it had a bit too much to drink, and it was definitely drooling. I jumped up and waved my arms at it. "Go away." I knew it was sick, and the poor thing was confused and probably suffering, but it creeped me the hell out. The creature cocked its head, seemingly examining me closely. It approached me and made some sort of gasping sound. It was opening and closing its mouth in a way that deeply unsettled me for some reason. "Sam." She came running towards me from the woods, and when I turned back, it had gone. "Are you okay? What happened?" The creepy deer was back. "I know it sounds silly, but I think it's been following us." I told her how it had been behaving. "Do you think it's rabid?" "Poor baby," she said sympathetically, "possibly. Or, I wonder if it has CWD. Regardless of the situation, it would be prudent to inform the park rangers." We had decided we'd stick together, but after a few miles, she ended up ahead of me again. She tends to inch forward to get pictures, whereas I tend to walk past sites, then have regrets and double back to take pictures. I had walked back a bit and was sitting down, angling my phone weirdly to try and fit the scene in front of me in the frame, when I heard Sam's voice, but I couldn't make out what she was saying. "Hey, I'll be right there," I said, my voice raised slightly, assuming she was talking to me. Then, she screamed. "Sam." I stood up and tried to walk as quickly and carefully as possible. Her screaming changed from fear to agony, and it sounded like she was sobbing. I wasn't sure what happened, but I could tell she was scared and likely hurt. I suddenly realized I was still holding our only canister of bear spray. Against my better judgment, I started running as fast as I could, and for a while I was making good time, but then my left foot landed on a patch of soft dirt at the edge of the trail, my ankle rolled, and I was falling. I don't remember hitting the ground, but I remember opening my eyes, flat on my back, about 15 feet below where I had been standing. It was also dark outside. We'd started hiking at least 6 to 7 hours before sunset. I tried to stand, but it was a struggle. I was confused and disoriented. Trying to get up was taking all my energy and focus. I had a deep feeling of dread I couldn't explain. As I started slowly moving upwards on my hands and knees, I tried to recall what had happened leading up to my fall. Sam sounded hurt, she was screaming. I had run after her, and then I fell. "Shit, Sam." I called her name, my voice hoarse, but no response. Surprisingly, my phone was only minorly damaged, however, I had no reception. Luckily, since it had been buckled to me, I still had our backpack. I dug through it. We had first aid kits, but I figured I could patch myself up later. I would rather not stay down here any longer than I had to. I found my knife and my headlamp. After about 20 minutes I had slowly, and painfully, ascended back towards where I had fallen from. My hands were raw, and I could feel my right knee bleeding through my pants. I was trying to go slowly since I trusted my feet even less now, and dizziness was starting to creep in, but panic and fear drove me forward. Once I made it back to the trail, I had to sit for a moment. I heard rustling behind me and felt a sudden pang of fear. Something or someone had injured Sam, and here I was sitting alone, injured, with my back to the woods, in the dark. I tried calling her name, hoping it was her voice I had heard, however, there was no response. I stood up and started limping as quickly as possible in the direction that I had last heard her scream. Luckily the ground had evened out, because I could feel myself weaving unsteadily. I knew that something terrible may have happened to her but kept trying to keep that thought out of my mind. As my calls to her remained unanswered and it became harder to imagine a scenario in which she was okay, I felt my throat tighten and tears roll down my cheeks. I kept looking for her. I knew she wouldn't just leave me here. I think part of me knew then that she was gone. She would have been searching for me if she was okay, and even if she left to get help, I think they would have found me by then. Eventually, I managed to navigate my way to the location where I believed she had last been. I was hoping maybe if she was injured, she was okay and just out of it and confused like I was. My foot caught in the mud, and I fell. Lights flashed behind my eyelids, and I felt overcome with nausea. The light from my headlamp had greatly dimmed, as it was now coated in mud and grime. I heard movement behind me. As the smell hit me, I realized the mud was dirt mixed with blood. I could taste it, mixed with the gritty texture. Leaves covered with what was likely blood stuck to my face, and I felt something soft and wet under my shoulder. The rustling behind me became discernible as footsteps. I felt around for my knife and my bear spray but instead felt something hard and sticky. I thought I had just learned what happened to Sam and what would happen to me next. I felt no urge to get up as the footsteps got closer. I knew I couldn't outrun it. I closed my eyes, trying to focus on something, anything else, not knowing if I wanted to see what was coming for me. The footsteps stopped, and I could hear labored breathing coming from above me. I waited, and then, as no blows came, I opened my eyes. It was Sam. She stood over me, breathing heavily from her mouth. Blood covered her. Despite the torn shirt and pants, she remained alive. I let out a relieved sob and then could no longer hold back the tears. "Oh my God," I whispered as I slowly moved to sitting and then standing. "I thought I had lost you." I pulled her close to me into a hug. She stood motionless, her arms at her side. Her shirt clung to me because it was still a bit wet. Dried blood covered the neck of her shirt and her midsection. Blood also smeared her hands and, unsettlingly, her mouth. I could still hear her breathing heavily close to my ear. "What happened?" I asked as I released her. She stared at me but didn't respond. I figured she was a bit traumatized. Frankly, I wasn't sure how she was up and standing at all after whatever had happened. She was a bit wobbly but otherwise seemed to be able to walk. As we walked towards the car, she fell behind me, which made me nervous as I didn't want to let her out of my sight. She kept stopping, staring over her shoulder, while I tried to coax her forward. Eventually, after what felt like forever, we made it back. My ankle was killing me, but I had tried to move as fast as possible. Although the woods were eerily silent, I wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. When we got to her car, I was debating if we should drive ourselves to the hospital, or call 911. I had this feeling of terror that I couldn't shake. I imagined that after we made it to the car, something would break the windows and attack us. I decided we needed to leave now. "Do you have your keys? Do you think you can drive?" I asked. She had an old Jeep pickup and was very sensitive about other people driving her baby, plus I wasn't sure I could drive us with my ankle as it was. She said nothing and cocked her head at me. "I know, we look like we've been mauled by a bear." I caught myself and winced, feeling suddenly insensitive. She clearly had been attacked by something or someone. When she said nothing, displayed no emotion or reaction, I cautiously continued, "But I have a bad feeling. I think we need to leave, like right now. I'd rather call for help when we're back on the main road or just drive straight to the hospital." She remained motionless, staring back into the woods, and I wondered if she lost her keys in whatever struggle she had. Luckily I had her spare with me. I unlocked the doors, and she continued to stand outside. I realized I would need to punish my ankle a bit more because she was far too out of it to drive. I slid in, but she remained motionless. "Sam, get in, please. Something is out here still. Please." She was licking her lips, staring back at me again. In the darkness, her blue eyes looked almost black. I limped out of my seat, opened her door, and guided her inside the car. I buckled her in after she made no move to do so for herself. As we drove, the headlights of passing cars illuminated the interior, prompting me to constantly check on her. She was breathing in and out of her mouth and staring at me. I noticed now, in the better light, that she was drooling. "Hey, how are you doing?" She didn't respond, but started to open and close her mouth, emitting a wet gasp as she breathed in and out. Her breath reeked, and her teeth were tinged pink. I don't have much medical knowledge, but I was worried she had a punctured lung due to the strange sounds she was making. "Hold tight, we're about 20 minutes from the hospital." Despite my ankle, I drove as fast as I could. We made it in 10. As we pulled up, I helped guide her out of the car and walked behind her, steadying her. I noticed something: her shirt was on inside out. It hadn't been this morning. Likely because of how we looked, they found rooms for us immediately in the ER. I was suffering from a severe sprain and a concussion, necessitating a few stitches, but it was a relief to be out of that area. I asked the nurse that came to check on me about how Sam was doing. I mentioned to him I'm not sure if she was attacked by an animal or a person. I mentioned what I had noticed about her shirt and that we may have encountered a sick animal, in case any of that helped. When he returned, he was clearly distressed. Sam was gone. She hadn't appeared to be outwardly injured, strangely, but they had wanted to assess for internal trauma. However, the first moment they had left her alone, she had just walked out, judging by the bloody footprints. It's been weeks, and I haven't seen Sam since. Her mom hasn't either. She has been working with the police out here. They think Sam has a head wound and is just confused and will turn up in town eventually. But, a few days ago, I heard on the news that a partial skeleton was found on the trail we were on. Likely the victim of an animal attack, they said, and due to the condition of the body, they were asking for leads so they could use dental records to help identify the victim. This might sound crazy, but I believe they found her. I don't know how to explain it, but I don't think Sam ever left those woods that night. It's my responsibility, and I am uncertain about what that entity was that I brought into town. If you live in southern Colorado, please be safe. Stranger in the woods. It was Christmas Eve day 2017. My grandfather had medical issues, so my parents had to go to the hospital. I don't know what he was going through, but it must have been serious because my parents took my siblings and me to my aunt and uncle's house, which was nearby. As my siblings and I said our hellos to the family, my parents gave my aunt and uncle all of our presents so that during Christmas morning we could open them even without our parents there. Now I'm not usually a depressed person, but when I had to celebrate Christmas while my parents were somewhere in another state, I definitely felt lonely and sad. My cousin and I are super close, so while my brother and sister spent the night on their phones, my cousin and I played 20 rounds of Injustice 2. Almost an hour went by when we decided to do something else. We went upstairs and started to read comics. My cousin's family is wealthy, so whenever we meet, he always brings a truck full of comics, video games, and other items. It's always annoying, and to be honest, I was always jealous. The first thing he did was show me his new monthly box of comics. He wouldn't shut up about how amazing each comic was, and I just wanted to scream. I told him I had to use the bathroom and walked to the bathroom. I stood in front of the sink and pulled out my phone. I found it futile to scroll through online, as it appeared that none of the people were sharing. I decided to turn to true scary story videos for the rest of the night to keep me occupied and my mind off of the whole situation. Christmas morning was quite possibly the worst day of my life. My cousin woke up at 5 in the morning. He woke everyone up, and we all proceeded to the living room, where almost half the floor was covered in presents for my one cousin. My aunt and uncle brought out my siblings and my presents. We finished opening them within 5 minutes. I got 4 things, not including candy, socks, and underwear. I received 2 comic books, an airsoft mask, and a book. Meanwhile, my cousin wasn't even halfway finished with opening his presents. Nintendo Switch, iPhone 8, and a new $400 video camera. You name it, he freaking had it. Around noon my parents called and explained that they wouldn't be coming home for another day. This day was just getting better and better. I decided to take a walk and headed outside. My cousin's house leads out to a small patch of woods. It was snowing pretty heavily when I started to walk into the woods. All I could think about wanted to go home and be with my parents. My cousin didn't follow me out to the woods, which was odd, as it always seemed he followed me around everywhere. Probably playing his new video games. I told myself. I rolled my eyes and walked into the woods. Normally, my depressing walk would have been cut short by walking through the woods with only a windbreaker on, but since I was filled with anger and frustration, I decided that I would rather freeze to death than see my cousin playing with all his new things. Petty as it sounds, I was not happy, and at the moment I didn't want to even think about him or my aunt or uncle or the stupid fact that I was a day's walk from my house. The woods were small and went about half a mile deep before coming out the other side to a random highway street. About 100 feet or so into my walk, I came upon this little opening in the woods. 2 logs sat parallel to each other with a small pit in the middle, separating the 2 logs. It was a little fire pit that my cousin said the other teenagers around his neighborhood used to smoke, drink, and do other things away from their parents. I sat down on the rotting log for a minute to catch my breath before looking over to spot a long stick. I picked up the stick and walked over to a nearby tree. Gripping the stick, I swung it at the tree. In my mind I was yelling, screaming, and swearing about the whole situation. I hated it all. The stick broke on the first hit. I stood there at the tree for a second, listening. From the distance I could hear the broken stick hit the dead leaves. I threw down the remaining part of the stick and turned around to sit back down. It wasn't even 5 minutes when I heard a thump on the dead leaves. At first I ignored it. It was probably some animal. It wasn't until the third or fourth thump that I started to take notice, each one getting closer and closer. When I heard the fifth thump, I stood up and began to scan the surrounding woods. Nothing. I called out, "Is there someone there?" Silence. I'm not normally a paranoid person, but lately I had been on edge. I stood there silently waiting until another thump. This time the thump sounded closer than ever, almost as if it had come from right behind me. I took off running. I didn't look back, I didn't wait to see if another thump would follow, and I didn't even stop to think until I was back at my cousin's house. My aunt, uncle, and parents greeted me as soon as I burst through the door. Who used the excuse of not coming home until the next day to surprise us. We got home, and I thought nothing of what had happened in the woods until I got a text that sent me into panic mode. It was around 10. I had just gotten out of the shower when I heard my phone buzzing on the sink. It was my cousin asking, "When you went on your walk, did you happen to see anybody suspicious?" I texted back, "No." It took him a little longer to reply, but his next message said, "Whenever you guys left, my parents noticed some guy staring at our house from the woods." I could feel the panic rising. I texted back quickly, "What did he look like?" "Homeless," he said, and that was it. Any attempt I made to try to get more answers was pointless, as my cousin seemed to stop answering me. He continues to refrain from answering my questions to this day. I would be lying if I said we ever heard anything about that random homeless guy. I don't know what intentions this person had, and I don't think I ever will. It just makes me wonder, what was that person doing in the woods, and what would have happened if I still ignored those thumps? Either way, I'm glad I was as paranoid as I was that day, because that paranoia might have just saved my life. Terrorized alone in the woods. Here's my true story of when I drove off the beaten track to end up being possibly the most scared I've ever been in my life. At that time, I was a 26-year-old woman, and I am now 32 years old. I loved traveling around Australia camping in my van, usually by myself, and 99% of the time these were all amazing experiences. On this trip I was heading from Mount Kosciuszko in southern New South Wales north towards the Blue Mountains, but I wanted to break up the drive for a night by camping in a state park and maybe take a shot or two at some rabbits with my longbow. I found what I thought to be the perfect isolated state park where hunting was allowed, and since it was midweek and the weather wasn't wonderful, I figured I'd have the mountains mostly to myself. I'd not taken into account the quality of the backroads to access the camping site. They were very badly maintained rock and dirt tracks that my tiny Toyota van struggled with. It took me over an hour to travel the 30 kilometers to the campsite, swearing to myself often as I rattled over yet another patch of corrugated dirt with the rear end of my van spinning out behind me. I was feeling grim and tense when I finally pulled up to the site, but I relaxed pretty quickly as the site was empty of people, and I could see rabbits hopping around about 200 meters away in a meadow. As soon as I pulled up beside a designated fire pit, I strung my bow and headed after them. The little guys had obviously already been hunted a few times before, though, because I couldn't get close enough for a confident shot at them. I left the rabbits to go about their rabbit lives and headed back to the van, where I started a fire, poured a glass of whiskey, and lit a cigarette, enjoying being out here in solitude and knowing that the closest population of people was over an hour's drive away. Now, I loved being by myself in the bush, but I've got this weird intuition thing that lets me know when I've landed in a safe space or not. A couple of times in the past I've driven into a potential site, and after a while I get this pressure in my chest and stomach. When that happens I bail, no questions asked. After sitting around my fire for a while, I did feel this pressure slightly, but after another whiskey, I decided to ignore it. It was too late in the evening to tackle that road, and I was over the legal driving limit after that second whiskey. Truth be told, I was probably over the limit after my first glass. So I sat there, drinking, smoking, and watching the sun go down. The sun disappeared quickly as I was in the bowl of a small valley with looming mountains all around me, and after watching the first stars appear, I decided to call it a night. I dropped 2 pairs of shoes outside my van door. One was a small pair of sandals, and the other was my massive hiking boots. I always do this when camping alone because I hope any creepers might think there's a man in the van and leave me alone. I fell asleep quickly but was woken at 12 a.m. by a gunshot. It sounded like it was on the other side of the mountain range to my left, and I largely ignored it, figuring that hunters were after deer or wild pig. I fell back asleep again pretty quickly but did not sleep as deeply as before. I was woken again by a much louder gunshot about an hour later. This shot had definitely been fired somewhere inside my little bowl in the bush, and it was a large caliber rifle. The echo was huge in this confined valley. I began to feel nervous. What if they were taking shots and my van happened to be in the way if they missed their target? I peeked through my curtains and saw my fire still had a few glowing embers. I hoped that the hunters might see it and know not to shoot in my direction. That was my primary concern at the moment. I was unaware that the situation was about to escalate significantly. For the next hour or so I drifted in and out of sleep, snapping awake and aware of the smallest noise. On one of these bouts of drifting out of consciousness, I heard a sound that had me sitting straight up in my bed. I hit my head on the roof of the van pretty hard but did not even notice as I was concentrating on the noise that woke me. Tires. Tires rolling and grinding on the rocky dirt track leading to my campsite. Now I'm sure there could be a few reasonable explanations for a car taking this isolated dead-end road at 3 in the morning. I even tried to think of some, but I failed because I was too on edge and just sat there in my bed, straining my ears to the utmost to try to figure out what this car was doing. Suddenly my van was filled with a shockingly bright light as the mystery car turned into the campsite and faced towards my van. I waited for the headlights to swing away, but they didn't. I couldn't see the car. My van has curtains at every window, and like duck I was parting them to give whoever was out there a good look into the van and at me. I was already feeling pretty spooked, but my terror rose sky high as I realized the car was now slowly driving towards me. The lights got brighter, the rumble of the diesel engine got louder, and what sounded like the biggest tires in the freaking world popped and grated at the rocks underneath them. By this time I'm frozen in place, too terrified to move a muscle, as this four-wheel drive beast of a car kept slowly moving forward until it was nose to nose with my tiny van. The headlights were so blinding, even through my curtains, that I had to turn back to face the other way, with my back towards the front of my van. Then I almost peed my pants. Whoever the asswipe was driving this car started revving his engine, over and over, harder and longer each time. It was the most aggressive sound I have ever heard coming from a machine, and I honestly can't tell you how freaking scared I was. I didn't know it was possible to feel more terror than I was already feeling, but I found out quickly it is always possible to reach higher levels of fear when I heard the sound of 2 car doors opening. I was too scared to move, but I broke through the fear paralysis long enough to grab my 6-inch hunting knife from the shelf above my head. I gripped it with white knuckles as I listened to a pair of heavy footsteps start to walk slowly around my van. The other person must have been standing just outside their car watching and waiting, as I didn't hear a second pair of footsteps. Maybe they were more stealthy and quiet, who the duck knows. All I know is that my straining ears were focused solely on the slow, purposeful steps of the first stranger as they stopped beside the sliding door of my van, where I had dumped my 2 pairs of shoes. My van was locked at every entry point, but 100 what-if scenarios were running at light speed through my head. Maybe I could dive into the driver's seat of the van and bolt out of there? Fat chance. With them being parked right in front of me, even if I did manage to drive around them, I still had 30 kilometers of rough bush road to navigate, bush tracks that their far superior car could manage with ease. I'd be run down before I'd gone 100 meters. I could string my bow and jump out to confront them, but then I'd never been that keen on suicide, so I thought I'd give that one a miss. I didn't even have a map of the area, so running like a scared rabbit into the bush wasn't even an option. Oh, the irony. So what I did do was wait. Frozen in my sitting position, still white-knuckling my knife, while person 1 finally moved away from the side door of my van back to their car. Their engine was revved again and again, as if trying to scare me out, and I still sat there. I sat still for what felt like hours but was most likely only minutes as I vaguely heard voices under the rumble of the engine. I couldn't make out a word, but the voices sounded male. And eventually, they just got in their car and slowly rolled away. I know how anticlimactic that sounds, but honestly, I don't really care a whole bunch. At the time I was filled with relief so great I was almost high off it, and at the same time so exhausted from the adrenaline dump I felt I could sleep a week, no worries. I didn't sleep, though. Thoughts of them just hiding around the corner of the road waiting for me to make a break for it were running through my head, as irrational as that sounds. I think the most confusing thing was having absolutely no idea what their intentions were. They could have just been the hunters I heard about, who maybe saw my fire and thought they'd come down to say hi and do a bit of lighthearted terrorizing. Or they could have had much darker things on their mind. It could have been locals wanting to play a prank to relieve their small-town boredom. Anyone who wants to shed some light, go for it. After 20 minutes of silence, I finally managed to pry my fingers off the handle of my knife one by one, using my left hand to do it. I put my knife beside me on the bed and sat staring glassy-eyed at the curtain on my rear window with my knees pulled to my chest until faint light filtered through the material, turning my interior from black to smoky gray. I peeked out at the pre-dawn day and saw no car, no other people. Just more rabbits, whom I now could not find the heart or motivation to hunt. I opened the sliding door and struggled outside, feeling like I was in a dream. I made a cup of the strongest coffee in the world and sipped it while staring distractedly at the footprints surrounding the van. Then I got into the driver's seat and drove an hour back to the main road. I kept expecting to see the car around each hidden bend, but really I would have no idea if I saw it or not. I never saw anything of the vehicle or men who terrorized me. So that was that. I drove on to the Blue Mountains and met up with some Belgian friends and ended up sticking with them for the rest of the 6-week trip. But I never forgot the feeling of being so scared and so helpless and so alone. Rarely, if ever, do I choose to camp in an empty campsite now. I'll move on to another one with more people. Thanks for listening. A man stalked me in the woods when I was stranded on a backcountry road at 3 a.m. Everything mentioned here is 100% factual. It's a long read, but I believe it's worth it. I grew up in the South. Tons and tons of beautiful places to see that haven't been taken over by concrete yet. It's nice. But along with that, it's pretty boring. Being a teenager and wanting to go out and have fun led to mostly improvising with your buddies and hoping something good would come out of the night. There wasn't really a local spot to go hang out like a club or cool bar, and the places that were close to this were boring because you did them so many times. I'm sure if you've ever lived in a rural area, you can understand that feeling completely. Something that I found a ton of enjoyment in as a teen was just cruising around super late at night listening to music. I would fill my gas tank up, grab something to drink and a cigarillo, and I would just take off driving around until the sun came up. It was a way for me to just clear my mind and relax. Those country back roads were always fun to drive down at 2 a.m. and were also just the right amount of spooky. Well, one night I absolutely got more than I was to bargain for. I can't remember what month it was exactly, but I know for a fact it was in the summertime because I was out of school, and I also remember it being a comfortable, chill night. So if I were to guess, it had just been around July or August. I was cruising around like I always did and was completely worry-free. I had music blaring, and I was in my zone. I decided to head down to a park just out of boredom. This particular park is at the very end of a long stretch of desolate country road, but it is a really pretty drive because of that. When I say desolate country road, I don't mean that it's some dirt road that goes through the woods or anything crazy like that. It is a normal paved road, but there is really nothing on it after a certain point. The entire road takes about 20 minutes to drive down to get to the park, and after about 10 minutes into the drive, the houses start to get spread out further and further until there are no houses and just a road leading into the park. I think a lot of the reason I like this drive at night is because of how creepy it was, and I looked at it as some sort of adventure or whatever. The park isn't open for camping or anything. It's mostly just a lot of land with walking trails and biking trails set up through miles of woods. So obviously at around 3 a.m. in the morning, it's pretty dead. I made it there and just did a slow, normal little loop around the park. The night before, it stormed terribly. So badly I remember my parents and I had to take shelter because of the threat of a tornado touchdown. There ended up being no tornado, but the storms were pretty damn rough. Because of this, I came upon a fallen tree in the road that looped around to the exit of the park that must have happened because of the storm. It wasn't some massive tree or anything. But I know for a fact that there was no way I could have gotten over it in my car, obviously. It was pitch black everywhere besides the front of my car because of my headlights, and because of that, I immediately ruled out backing up the entire way I just drove when I entered the park. I knew that was super dangerous, and there was no way. At this spot on the road, there was flat land on each side of me. I figured that it would make the most sense to just back up in the grass beside me just a little and then drive back the way I came. It was a one-way loop around the park, but I wasn't really worried about going out the wrong way since it was so late. So I started to back off of the road so I could get my car turned around. All was good until I went to pull back up on the road. I totally didn't take into account how wet the grass was and the amount of mud. My car went absolutely nowhere. My back tires were completely stuck and were spinning in place as I was trying to floor the gas pedal. I started to become pretty scared at this point. Not the most ideal situation to be in. I immediately took my cell phone out of my pocket and saw that I had service. Super huge feeling of relief. I called my parents and told them what happened and where I was. They were pretty pissed at me but said they would pay for a tow truck to come get me out. My parents both drove small 4-door sedans, and they would have been zero help in the situation. I was about 45 minutes away from my house and the rest of most human civilization. So I realized that I would be stuck out there for at least an hour before someone was able to get to me. Freaky feeling, but I tried getting out of my head and just continued to listen to music and be on my phone in the car while I waited. Not really much more I could do. After I kind of calmed down from the initial anger I had, I started to check out my surroundings. I didn't even notice at first because of everything going on, but in front of my car's placement was a field that was full of the most amount of deer I think I've ever seen at once. There legitimately must have been 40 deer in this field just walking around and eating the grass. The field wasn't directly in front of my car, but if I were to get out and throw a rock in that direction, I would have easily been able to hit one of them. So if I were to guess, they were about 30 yards out. This didn't really help with the creepy level going on. Looking out in front of your car and seeing 80 reflections staring back at you is a bit of an alarming feeling overall. But I was relieved it was just a field of deer. I watched them for a little bit, but I was quickly over it and started to just browse through my social media apps while waiting. They seemed to have been over it quicker than I was because they all went back to walking around and eating once they figured out that I wasn't going to attack them or anything. After browsing my phone for about 15 minutes, I finally get a call back from my parents letting me know that a tow truck guy is on the way and about an hour and a half out from my location. Still to this day I remember hearing that and having the thought, you have got to be ducking kidding me. I understood that I and only I was the reason I was in the situation I was in, so I couldn't really be mad at anyone else. But that was very obviously not what I wanted to hear. I decided that the smartest thing for me to do was just make sure my doors were all locked, lay back in my seat, and take a nap to pass time quickly. So that's what I did. Okay, here we go. So I wake up 45 minutes later to the feeling of being watched. I'm not sure if anyone has ever experienced that feeling before because I don't know how common it is. But there was a sixth sense alarm going off in my head telling me that I needed to wake up. Waking up to that feeling in the situation I was in and the surroundings I was in is probably the worst case scenario. I sit up and immediately check my surroundings and see nothing. I looked through my car very quickly for any sort of weapon and found a pocket knife. A ducking pocket knife. I was very scared. Even though I saw and heard absolutely nothing, that feeling is terrifying. I was shocked to see that the field of deer in front of me was still full of deer. I don't know anything about the animal, but I guess I always just assumed they don't hang out in the same place for long. Not sure why I thought that, but I was surprised to see them nonetheless. I called my parents back to see if they heard any kind of update from the tow truck dude. I decided to not mention the feeling I was having because I didn't want them to worry more, and I also knew that it was literally nothing more than a feeling I had and had nothing to back up why I was feeling that way other than just being spooked out in general. No update from the tow truck guy, so we all assumed everything was still the same on his end. The call lasted just a few minutes because I felt like such a jerk. They both had to wake up for work in a few hours, now have to spend a random $100 plus, and on top of all that, they were worried about me. I could tell they were annoyed at the situation but worried. I told them I'll make sure to tell them when the guy arrives, and I'm sorry. We hung up, and I looked up from the phone and immediately went from 0 to 100 in panic mode. The deer in front of me were all completely perked up, staring in the same direction right of them. Let me remind you that there are around 40 deer in this field. Every single one of them were stopped dead in their tracks, standing completely still, looking at something. I put my high beams on and stared, waiting for absolutely anything to happen at all. Nothing. I tapped my horn real quick. They didn't even budge or look my way. They were all still completely glued to what was by them. The way the tree line was, I couldn't see that far over in the field. I know they were looking into the woods by them, but where I was at, I was only able to see them. I could hear my heartbeat. I grabbed that stupid pocket knife and just waited for something to happen. I would say it was about a minute after I honked, every single one of them in unison started to run the opposite way. They were running at full speed, and within 20 seconds the field was completely empty. I was petrified with fear. I knew that staying in my car was what would be the safest thing to do. But it's the worst feeling in the world when you feel like a sitting duck. My head was on a swivel. I was freaking out in every way possible. I assumed that it was a bear or something. But it could have been absolutely anything. I was convinced at that point it was the devil himself. I didn't know what to do. I knew that the tow truck was close by, but I had no idea where he was. I began to shake because of nerves and just looked around to make sure nothing was by me, focusing on the field in front of me. I did this for what felt like an actual eternity. Sitting in complete silence and darkness in the middle of nowhere. Waiting for something to jump out and attack you. 15 of the longest minutes of my life go by, and I start to see lights break through the tree line on the road. As it gets closer, I see it as the tow truck guy. The lights on his truck felt like it was Jesus coming from heaven to rescue me. He gets up to me, and I jump out of my car and immediately ask him if he has a gun on him. I told him very quickly what just happened to me and that something is definitely out here nearby. He let me know that he had a shotgun in the truck and assured me that it was most likely a bear or bobcat. He gave me the whole "they are more scared of you than you are of them" bullshit. The tree was small enough for him to sort of bulldoze it out of the way with his truck, and then he attached my car to his and pulled me out of the spot I was stuck in. He was very nonchalant about what I'd just experienced, but I was pretty badly shaken up from it. The whole time he was doing his thing, I still had my eyes glued out in that field, waiting for something. He was completely done with everything in about 15 minutes, and he told me to follow his truck out of there onto the main road again. I got in my car and was ready more than anything to get the hell out of this park. We started to drive away from the spot I was in, and I still had my head on a swivel. Completely shook up. As we were driving away, I looked in my rearview mirror. We were down the park road just a tiny bit, but I could still see the spot I was stuck in partially lit up from the vehicle's lights and the moon. I watched in my rearview mirror as a man came out of the tree line behind where my car was and walked into the middle of the road and watched us drive away. My heart stopped beating. Legitimately. I lost my breath, and my eyes started to get full of tears because of how absolutely scared I was in this moment. I couldn't see any sort of details, like what he looked like or even necessarily what he was wearing. To be honest, I don't really care. The feeling that I felt driving away from that spot knowing he was right there the whole time watching me. Watching me as I was freaking out looking around. Watching me as I was completely alone for a long time. Maybe even coming right up to my window and watching me as I slept. That's a feeling that is something I can't necessarily put into words. All these years later, and it still messes with me quite a bit. The entire time we were driving off, as long as I could see him, he didn't move. Just watched us in the road. A million things went through my mind. I was scared there may have been multiple people up the road waiting for us. I was trying to figure out if I should start beating on my horn like crazy to get the tow truck guy to stop or not. I decided that all I wanted to do was get out of there. More than anything. The second that we finally got out of the park and were able to be on a 2-lane road again, I flew past the tow truck driver, and I did nothing below 70 miles per hour the entire way home. I flew through stop signs and stoplights. I absolutely did not care. The only thing on my mind was making it home. I got home, ran inside, very quickly acknowledged my parents and said, "Sorry and thank you," and went to my room. I didn't get a single second of sleep the rest of the night. I was searching for any sort of records of things happening in that area, escaped convicts, similar stories, etc. I came to the conclusion that the man was some sort of squatter or homeless person. I read many things online about how it's common for homeless people in rural areas to build shelter in the woods. Which does make sense to me entirely as to why they would do that. But obviously the unknown is the scariest part of it all. What if he wasn't homeless? What if he was going to hurt me? What if? There are so many possibilities of what could have happened. But the outcome that did happen is what I am most grateful for. I never told my parents this story until many years after it happened and I was already an adult and moved out. It freaked them the duck out too when I told them. I never went back to that park. Ever. Even though I no longer live there, I still have no desire at all to ever go back there. I don't think I could, even in broad daylight with a ton of people around. I also made the decision to stop doing those late night cruises. I did a few after that time with people. But even then I felt very uncomfortable and on edge. So, man in the woods. Let's not meet ever again.